As the villagers of Axis Village cheered enthusiastically and begged them to return, the young man quietly reminded them that he was no hero. Beside him, Saint Arya offered a gentle smile, assuring him that to the people he had saved, he truly was a hero regardless of formal titles. Looking ahead to their next journey, he asked where they should head, and she warmly declared her intention to return her hero's party license so they could register anew as independent adventurers. She cheerfully selected the newcomer town of Norish as their next destination, eager for a fresh start. Meanwhile, far from their peaceful conversation, the ambient air elsewhere crackled with tension as an incantation was uttered to summon a holy blade into battle. In the perilous depths of an A-rank dungeon, a place where even veteran party groups could easily face total destruction, Hero Alan arrogantly dismissed any danger, boasting that clearing the labyrinth was a simple task even without their former mana porter and saint. However, Mythia frantically reminded him of their dire need to preserve mana for the trip back, while Riril nervously noted that without their healer present, any injury could prove fatal. Memories of Alan's reckless decision to banish their essential companions still haunted the party, with young Lillian having wept in disbelief over her senior's sudden departure, refusing to accept that he was gone. Ignoring their desperate warnings, the self-absorbed leader foolishly argued that fleeing an A-rank dungeon was an act of cowardice and insisted that mana shortages were rare. His party members realized too late that their previous effortless journeys were entirely thanks to their exiled companion, who had seamlessly replenished their energy without ever letting them feel the burden. Before the argument could escalate further, a wave of ferocious monsters ambushed the ill-prepared party, lunging at them in relentless succession. As chaos enveloped their ranks, the small mage raised her magic staff high into the air, struggling to cast a spell against the overwhelming swarm pressing down upon them. As she watched her party leader stomp his boot down onto a slain beast's snout, his arrogant laughter echoed through the damp cavern walls. Standing triumphantly over the corpse, he boasted about their party's overwhelming strength, completely blind to the dangers surrounding them. That supreme confidence shattered in an instant as a sudden, strange sensation surged through his body, taking him completely off guard. Nearby, the exhausted mage collapsed to the ground, warning that her magic was completely drained without their former companion's support, while the hot-headed leader desperately tried to force his holy sword to activate. Instead of unleashing a devastating strike, a sudden and blinding headache struck him down, forcing him to clutch his skull in sheer agony. Reeling from the unbearable pain, he felt as though his head was being crushed in a vice, utterly bewildered by a physical sensation he had never felt before. Seeing his distress, his companion shouted that he was suffering from a severe mana shortage, a diagnosis he found baffling and impossible to comprehend. Under normal conditions, his immense natural reserves meant standard combat techniques would never drain his energy to critical levels. Because he had been paired with a dedicated porter from the moment he became a hero, he had routinely unleashed the devastating Holy Sword skill without ever perceiving its enormous mana cost. As he lay weakened on the cavern floor, a lethal A-rank lizard man stalked out from the dark, forcing his swordswoman to step forward and defend her helpless leader. He collapsed into sheer panic as the giant lizard man loomed over them, drooling at the prospect of a fresh meal. Terrified, the self-proclaimed hero shrieked for his mage to fall back and shield him, shocked to see their vanguard warriors still stubbornly fighting. Driven by self-preservation, he argued fiercely that his survival took absolute priority over a mere magic swordswoman, demanding that everyone abandon her to save his own skin. Yet, the young mage refused to listen, steadfastly turning her back on his frantic orders to protect her friend. Confronting his cowardice head-on, she declared that someone who turns his back on his allies has no right to call himself a hero. Though her own magical reserves were completely drained, she steeled her resolve to contribute in whatever way she could. Driven by that newfound determination, she leapt into action and struck the monstrous reptile square on the head with a heavy physical blow from her staff. The cowardly hero could only stare in utter bewilderment as a spellcaster relied on brute martial strength. Joining forces beside her comrade, the swordswoman commended the mage's sudden physical strike, noting that their former companion Ishua had wisely urged them to master non-magical combat for dire moments like this. Side by side, the two determined women let out a fierce battle cry as they pressed their assault against the towering beast. Executing a swift maneuver, the agile warrior locked the creature in a tight grapple from behind, holding its powerful arms at bay while the disgraced leader cowered on the ground beneath them. With a final, coordinated effort, they slammed the formidable monster hard onto the stone floor, rendering it unconscious while the fallen hero gaped in stunned silence. Looking back at him with piercing gazes, they made their stance unmistakably clear. Unlike a coward who leaves others behind, they would never abandon a comrade in battle. Standing resolute together alongside their saint, the brave women declared that every single one of them would survive and return home, refusing to give up until the very end. Exhaling in pure relief, she raised her arms high into the air, celebrating their narrow escape from the cavernous dungeon, while her companions slumped over in total exhaustion. As they caught their breath, the young warrior began teasing their self-proclaimed leader about his complete reliance on magic sword techniques and lack of basic swordsmanship, while the young mage quietly agreed. Her light-hearted mocking enraged him instantly, driving the young hero to scream in fury that they had failed their mission and were forced to retreat empty-handed. He continued his rant, indignantly claiming that he had carried the team by slaying most of the beasts, berating them for fighting with daggers and bludgeoning staves instead of proper heroics. Unfazed by his outburst, the young mage delivered a cold, blunt retort, pointing out that his own arrogance and poor management were the sole reasons for their setback. Realizing he was utterly indefensible, the arrogant warrior clutched his forehead and lamely blamed a sudden headache for his pathetic retreat, while the two women simply turned their backs and dismissed him entirely. His heart sank as he caught the cold, disdainful glares from his companions, realizing with a chill how little respect they had left for him. Deciding to ignore their sulking leader, the duo took charge of the group and directed them toward a nearby village as dusk began to settle over the landscape. Upon arriving at the settlement of Axis, a welcoming local innkeeper greeted the weary travelers at the entrance of her establishment, offering them local delicacies and shelter. He puffed up his chest in an attempt to assert his heroic prestige, introducing himself grandly to the innkeeper, only for her to immediately compare him to the beloved former hero, Ishua, praising his kindness and charming companion instead. He scoffed in utter disbelief upon learning where his former companion had headed, expressing outrage that a mere failure could be praised as a hero. However, an indignant local woman immediately confronted him, shouting fiercely in defense of the town's beloved savior. Unwilling to back down, the hot-headed warrior blurted out that the man was nothing more than a vicious fraud whom he had personally banished for spouting nonsensical claims about supplying mana. Hearing this shocking lie, his own companions gasped, realizing for the first time that their former comrade had been forcibly cast out rather than leaving voluntarily. As the swordswoman confronted him over his previous lie regarding their companion's departure, he realized his slip-up with a sudden jolt of panic. Quickly attempting to gloss over the blunder, he imperiously demanded that the locals lead them to the finest inn and provide free recovery potions. The stern woman met his arrogant demands with a cold, unyielding glare, asking point-blank if he even possessed the coin to pay for such services. The young swordsman recoiled in genuine astonishment, stunned that anyone would dare question his right to demand free goods. He bellowed back that requisitioning items from common folk was an absolute privilege granted to heroes, insisting it was their duty to cooperate. His outburst only horrified his allies further, while the surrounding villagers looked on with deepening contempt. Recognizing the gravity of his foolish entitlement, the party spellcasters murmured nervously to one another, aware that such privileges only applied under dire emergency circumstances. Tensions boiled over as the armed townsfolk closed in from all sides, brandishing pitchforks and heavy pans while denouncing him as a sham who extorted hard-working people under the guise of heroism. While he desperately stammered that his party was genuine, the fiery townswoman shut him down instantly, praising how their true savior had never demanded so much as a word of thanks, making his greedy demands all the more despicable. Outraged by his disrespect toward their revered figure, the mob unleashed a barrage of stones and vegetables, forcing the party to duck and shield themselves from the flying debris. Driven completely out of the settlement under a shower of thrown objects, the disgraced leader fled alongside his dismayed party, cursing his misfortune as his companions noted that he was merely reaping the consequences of his own arrogance. He yelled back at the retreating crowd in sheer fury as vegetables smashed around him, vowing that they would pay for treating him this way. Turning away from the hostile villagers, he was immediately confronted by his own party members, who demanded to know why he had lied to them about banishing Ishua. The women expressed their disbelief, arguing that Ishua had always been kind to them and that conquering an A-rank dungeon without his mana support was an impossible task. They insisted on leaving to apologize to him, but Alan cut them off with a defensive roar, accusing them of holding him back. Doubling down on his arrogance, he bared his teeth and threatened to banish them from the hero's party as well if they continued to question his authority. Yet, a cold sweat broke out on his brow as a sudden wave of panic hit him, making him question if his bluster had just pushed things too far. His fears were instantly confirmed as Mathia and Riril made their stance clear, stating flatly that he was unfit to be a hero and that they had no reason to remain without Ishua. Recognizing the disastrous reality of losing his entire team, he stood frozen in silent horror. Desperate to regain control, he tossed party credentials to the ground and ordered them to use whatever means necessary to gather mana potions so they could tackle the dungeon. Instead of obeying, Mathia picked up the official licenses and handed them right back to him, firmly rejecting his command and returning her membership. Clinging desperately to his bruised pride, he held up the hero license and loudly proclaimed his status as a renowned hero, quietly telling himself this was only a temporary setback until he recruited new members. Mathia and Riril simply stared back with complete indifference, utterly unimpressed by his empty bravado. She turned her back on her former leader, offering a cold parting wish for his future before walking away into the distance alongside her companion. Left entirely alone in the shadow of the dense forest, the humiliated hero sank to his knees, paralyzed by the sudden collapse of his authority. As they strolled down the quiet country road, the swordswoman pondered their uncertain future, suggesting to her magical ally that they might still reunite with the exiled mana porter if he would have them. To their mutual astonishment, both women confessed to possessing both a tracking spell and a stray strand of his black hair, marveling at the absurd statistical improbability of their shared secret. Holding up the tiny black threads like treasured relics, they stared at each other in comical disbelief at the identical precautions they had individually taken. Nervous laughter burst from them as they accepted the bizarre twist of fate, casting aside their embarrassment to focus on the magic at hand. Channeling their mana into the catalyst, the detection magic flared to life across the open sky, instantly pinpointing their target's location. Reading the magical signal, they confirmed that he was heading straight for Nabish, a settlement famous as a haven for novice adventurers. Far behind them, the abandoned hero flew into a raging frenzy, screaming curses at the trees and vehemently refusing to accept his complete loss of status. Deluding himself with frantic arrogance, he reasoned that he could simply rehire his former porter, convincing himself the outcast was struggling alone and would weep tears of gratitude to be taken back. He activated Party Discovery, a unique hero skill designed to track down any holder of his party's official license. Pinpointing the exact location of his former comrade, his search came to a swift resolution. Having confirmed that his target was residing in the newcomer's town of Nabish, he struck a confident pose, declaring that Ishua would soon be forced back into his service. Far from the hero's scheming, an energetic voice echoed beneath the open sky, calling out in joyful excitement. Beside her steadfast companion Diana, young Lillian celebrated with delight, thrilled that their journey had finally brought them to their destination. Below them spread the bustling expanse of Nabish, the legendary newcomer's town, welcoming the travelers as they gazed upon its sprawling rooftops and lively. She placed her hands around the testing orb and concentrated her power, causing the crystal sphere to flare with intense, blinding magic. As the brilliant light settled, the guild staff stared in awe at the displayed status, admiring her top-tier intelligence and magic stats as expected of a saint from the hero's party. Finished with her evaluation, she happily stepped aside and invited her companion to take his turn at the measuring sphere in the guild hall. He stood alongside Arya at the registration counter, having officially relinquished their status as members of the Heroes Party to begin anew as independent adventurers. As the guild receptionist presented the status measurement crystal, she explained that parameters ranged from F to S, with F being average and anything above A earning immense prestige. When his palm made contact with the orb, a sudden burst of brilliant light erupted from the crystal, stunning the onlookers who gasped at the unexpected surge of mana from a simple mana porter. The receptionist leaned in closer, her jaw dropping as she read the unbelievable parameters, displaying high marks across physical and mental attributes. But what truly astounded everyone was his magic power stat, which defied all known measurement limits by displaying an unheard-of SSS rank. The crowd erupted into bewildered, hushed whispers, questioning if the crystal was malfunctioning, while Arya smiled warmly, pointing out that she had truly never seen him run out of mana before. Realization dawned upon the surrounding adventurers as they digested what an SSS rank in mana meant. An effectively limitless pool of magic power allowing for endless spellcasting. Composing herself after the overwhelming shock, the receptionist cleared her throat and officially pronounced the starting ranks for both the Genius Saint and the Extraordinary Mana Porter. Due to their astonishing capabilities, they were immediately granted C-rank status upon registration, bypassing the standard entry ranks and sending shockwaves through the watching crowd. Within seconds of the announcement, a frenzy broke out across the hall as desperate adventurers swarmed the pair, clamoring for them to join their parties. He stood wide-eyed and bewildered as the crowd pressed in, while Arya, overwhelmed by sudden shyness, abandoned her serene composure and shrank back behind him in panic. As the guild members clamored boisterously around them, the young porter attempted to pacify the mob, protesting that his role was merely carrying mana and insisting he held little worth compared to the saint at his side. Before the commotion could escalate further, an authoritative female warrior intervened, stepping forward to clear the crowd and introducing herself as Diana, an S-rank sword saint. Apologizing for the crowd's rudeness, Diana revealed that she belonged to the party of hero Lillian, the renowned conqueror of the heavenly King Ifrit, and expressed a desire to speak with him directly. Without hesitation, the sword saint extended an invitation for him to join her party, shocking the onlookers. However, he gently declined, explaining that he intended to travel only with familiar companions for the time being. Her companion stepped forward to voice her concerns, questioning whether they could trust a party leader who sent a representative instead of meeting them in person, mindful of the hardship he had previously endured under an unappreciative hero. Hearing her candid objection, Diana hesitated, her sharp gaze softening slightly as she acknowledged the complexity of their situation. Seeking to ease the tension, he reassured his companion that Diana seemed genuinely trustworthy, suggesting that her leader must also be honorable if she earned such loyalty, before apologizing to the sword saint for the frank questioning. He candidly revealed that he had only recently been banished from his former party, reiterating his wish to only adventure alongside trusted friends, which left Diana visibly startled by his blunt honesty. Accepting his decision, Diana later reported her failure to hero Lillian, who dissolved into dramatic tears over missing the recruit, while Diana secretly reflected on the quiet sincerity of the young man she had just met. She stood in quiet contemplation as the traveler took his leave, reflecting on how he had acknowledged the hero's nobility despite turning down her offer. Turning back toward her young master, the sword saint offered a humble apology for failing her task, while the girl remained enclosed within a vast array of floating magic circles. Even without a magic-oriented class, the warrior understood that as one's training deepens, their spellcraft becomes infinitely more intricate and precise. Before her eyes, the young prodigy effortlessly compressed that vast web of arcane energy down into a tiny, dense orb hovering right above her hands. Her gaze remained heavy and unblinking, veiled beneath her bangs in an expression devoid of any youthful enthusiasm. Floating gently to the ground with her plush companion in tow, she softly conceded that the traveler had his own burdens, accepting that the situation could not be helped. Her renown had spread far across the realm after driving back one of the 4 heavenly kings, cementing the legend of a girl who was born with the hero job itself. Having observed her progress for years, The Sword Saint knew the girl trained with stoic dedication, never permitting an ounce of arrogance to cloud her mind. Yet, that crushing mantle of responsibility had robbed her of her youth, slowly dulling her emotions until she seemed almost detached from the world. Or at least, that was the solemn image she projected, right up until a sudden crack appeared in her composure. Her stoic composure completely shatters, and she bursts into loud, dramatic tears, clinging desperately to Diana's waist. Overcome with sudden insecurity, she panics, wailing and wondering aloud if Ishua dislikes her. Diana can only look down in mild shock at the sudden emotional breakdown of the famed hero. When reminded that he had personally invited her to meet in flesh, she flushes red, violently protesting that she could never handle something so embarrassing. Clutching her teddy bear while excitedly planning how they can assist him on his journey, the young girl reveals a completely different side of herself, prompting Diana to marvel at the sight of a legendary hero experiencing her very first crush. Realizing that underneath all that colossal power lies a tender, ordinary teenage girl discovering romance, Diana warmly resolves to aid her in her pursuit of love. Gazing up into the open sky, she sends a silent prayer that this new path will bring genuine joy and a fruitful encounter to the young hero. Bright and early the next morning, Ishua steps outside the local adventurers guild alongside Arya, officially embarking on their new journey as active guild members. Stepping into the Grand Hall, they are greeted by a chaotic spectacle of aggressive mercenaries shouting and jostling for prime positions around the bulletin board. Navigating around the rowdy crowd, the companions approach a designated table where specific request documents have been laid out for review. Upon closer inspection, her eyes widen in surprise as she realizes the high rank and significance of the quests waiting for them to undertake. She watched as Ishua scanned through the stack of available quest postings, reading off tasks ranging from cleaning power reactors and finding lost pets to exterminating hordes of the undead, a task he noted as her personal specialty. Without hesitation, he gathered up a whole bundle of the overlooked, low-priority requests, expressing genuine excitement for them. The guild staff was stunned by his choice, while she squealed with delight at the prospect of taking on a feline retrieval quest. Nearby, Lillian praised his humility, amazed that he would willingly accept tasks that others deemed beneath them, though he merely tilted his head in mild confusion at her dramatic reaction. The guild receptionist explained that those specific requests had been left abandoned for a reason, as the meager rewards were simply not worth the immense effort required to locate a single missing cat. Yet moments later, he returned with an army of stray cats clinging to his shoulders, arms, and coat, leaving Lillian completely speechless at the impossible speed of his success. As they successfully secured the exact cats specified in the contract, he revealed his secret. Cats responded to a precise mana wavelength, making feline rescue uniquely effortless for a skilled mana porter like himself. Outside, Lillian and Diana reflected on the sheer absurdity of the feat, calculating that tracking down a lost cat using raw combat prowess or traditional sword skills could have taken them hours, if not a lifetime. Transitioning to their next assignment in a dark graveyard, she unleashed her sacred magic, channeling a radiant blast of divine light known as Holy Night Judgment. The holy beam obliterated hundreds of undead in a single sweeping blow, a feat that normally demanded immense quantities of costly mana potions, though she happily declared how much fun it was to fight alongside him. Watching from afar, Lillian marveled at how he had supplied such an overwhelming reserve of mana entirely on his own, though she stubbornly insisted that they would surely need extra help on their next quest. She wailed in disbelief as the quest concluded in mere seconds. Beside her, the young saint felt almost guilty accepting payment for work made trivial by her companion's immense power, having effortlessly completed the filtration of all 32 reactors. Before they could even reflect on their compensation, a group of aggressive thugs representing a rival company disrupted the site, furious at losing the lucrative contract. Seeing the encroaching mob, the young warrior and her sword saint mentor felt a rush of anticipation, believing their moment to battle had finally arrived. Observing the rising confrontation, the black-haired strategist stepped forward and commanded his holy ally to seek safety. Because their attackers were ordinary humans surrounded by volatile reactors, large-scale offensive holy magic was far too dangerous to employ. A confident smile playing on his lips, he took a firm stance right in front of the advancing mob, ready to handle the crisis on his own terms. The aggressors ground to a sudden halt, their bravado collapsing as an uncomfortable pressure filled the air, leaving their leader bewildered and staggering back. Spreading his arms wide, he activated his specialized mana ring field, blanketing the immediate area in a dense cloud of invisible energy. Though meant to accelerate magic recovery for skilled sorcerers, this sudden influx of high-density mana acted like a severe toxin to non-magical individuals, causing the thugs to drop to their knees in agony from intense migraines and nausea. Despite the debilitating ambient mana, a solitary armored mercenary managed to resist the symptoms, dragging his heavy axe forward while cursing through gritted teeth. Seeing him remain upright, the young strategist recognized that this warrior was no mere thug, but a seasoned adventurer hired to secure the rival company's interests. Realizing he needed to incapacitate the lone combatant safely, he raised his glowing hand and focused his power directly onto his target, unleashing a targeted burst of mana overflow. The forced injection of concentrated energy instantly caused severe magical intoxication, sending the rugged mercenary crashing unconscious to the floor. As the conflict ended without a single drop of blood spilled, the young girl and her mentor watched in stunned silence, awestruck by his unconventional tactical genius. She could only watch in silence alongside Diana as the true depth of Ishua's power became undeniable. His SSS rank mana was no mere ornament, but a force he could skillfully manipulate, weaponizing a spell originally intended for recovery by overwhelming the local concentration of ambient mana. Inspired by the display, she enthusiastically proclaimed that they would surely step in to assist him next time, but Diana quietly intervened, privately realizing that as long as Ishua possessed such terrifying mastery, an occasion where he would ever require their aid would simply never arrive. Meanwhile, far from that quiet countryside encounter, a lone figure stood perched upon a high cliff overlooking a sprawling city built within a massive crater, letting out a long breath into the wind. Turning his gaze down toward the valley, he flashed an arrogant, eager grin, relishing the fact that he had finally arrived at Nabish, the renowned town of Newcomb. The dark-haired youth stepped into the lively establishment with a cheerful greeting, accompanied by his petite companion. Whispers immediately rippled through the room as patrons recognized him as the legendary adventurer with SSS rank mana capacity, marveling that someone of his immense power continued to selflessly take on low-paying, humble tasks. Moving toward the counter, he offered a modest smile as the receptionist noted how popular he had become in just a few days. He quietly dismissed the praise, maintaining that people were simply overestimating him and that he was merely taking on requests that suited his routine. Their quiet exchange was abruptly shattered as the angry former hero stomped into view, his scowl radiating intense fury. Shocked by his sudden appearance, the young man could only stare in disbelief, demanding to know what had brought his former leader there. He sneered as he confronted the pair, boasting that he had banished both the sage and the magic swordswoman from his group. Ishua and Lillian looked on in disbelief, questioning why he would ever discard such talented companions. Grandiosely extending what he considered a generous offer, he declared that he would graciously allow them back into his hero party despite their drop to F-rank status. Across the counter, Ishua and Lillian simply stared at him with complete indifference. Bewildered by their lack of gratitude, he urged them to celebrate returning to his glorious party, only to be interrupted by the quiet sound of laughter spreading through the tavern. Angrily demanding to know why everyone was laughing, he was met with mockery from the surrounding patrons, who revealed they had already heard from the saint about the foolish hero who threw away Ishua. Enraged by the insult, he shouted at the crowd, asserting his status and furiously pointing out that Ishua and Lillian were far above F-rank anyway. Unfazed by his outburst, the locals pointed out that Ishua's unbelievable mana capacity made him a legend in town, openly mocking Alan for desperately crawling back only because his party was failing without a mana provider. Seething in humiliation as the tavern mocked him, he grew furious at being ridiculed by commoners, but Ishua calmly rejected his offer, stating they were doing just fine on their own and had no intention of returning. Turning his back on his former leader, Ishua casually handed a quest request over to complete his work, treating the self-proclaimed hero as if he were entirely invisible. Trembling with unbridled rage at being rejected and humiliated by those he deemed beneath him, his mind snapped, and his hand instinctively moved toward the weapon at his hip. Before he could draw his blade, Diana intervened with command in her voice, warning him that violence inside the guild was strictly forbidden. Emanating a deadly, beastly aura, she dared him to draw his sword against her if he truly possessed the resolve to face a real opponent. Her crushing aura completely overwhelmed Alan, forcing the arrogant young man to swallow his pride and retreat with a frustrated warning before any blood could be spilled. Watching Alan leave, she noted that Ishua's disdain for the current generation of heroes was entirely justified, expressing quiet concern about what trouble Alan might cause in the future. In the days that followed, Ishua and his companions quietly moved on, steadily accepting and fulfilling numerous duo requests throughout the region. About a week later, a strange request caught their attention at the guild counter. A simple scouting mission to an elf village offering an extraordinarily high reward of 30 gold coins, astonishing Lillian. Ishua examined the contract with deep suspicion, reasoning that veteran adventurers would never ignore such lucrative pay unless something dangerous was hidden behind the anonymous client's request. Hesitant to put anyone in danger, Ishua began to decline, but the guild receptionist urgently urged him to take it, assuring him that all he needed to do was check on the village and report back. Flustered by his sharp deduction, the receptionist admitted that there was indeed a special reason why this lucrative request had been directed specifically toward him. She finally confessed that the contract hadn't come from an outside client at all, but was a direct, official assignment issued by the guild itself for Ishua. She explained that the guild leadership wanted to grant him a special bonus for his relentless work, but knowing his humble nature would make him refuse an outright gift, they disguised it as a high-paying duo quest. Joining her hands in a desperate plea, the receptionist begged him to treat the task as a simple, well-funded sightseeing trip, leaving Ishua utterly dumbfounded by the guild's persistence. He stood quietly as his young companion beamed with unbridled excitement, practically pleading for a peaceful sightseeing trip just for the two of them rather than another grueling job. Reflecting on how relentlessly he had dragged her through quest after quest recently, he realized she truly deserved a break, which only emboldened her passionate plea to stretch their wings. Convinced by her enthusiasm, he officially gave the receptionist his approval to take the assignment, sending his cleric partner into a fit of pure joy. Overhearing the exchange from a nearby table, Diana and Lillian learned that the pair were bound for the elf village, prompting the hero to immediately suggest following them to earn their trust. Diana voiced her skepticism that two capable adventurers would need any help at all, while quietly disturbed by how unnaturally proficient at stalking Lillian had become over the past week. Ignoring her mentor's logical points entirely, the determined young hero marched up to the counter to demand any quest located in the vicinity of the elf village. The receptionist reluctantly informed them that the only available contract in that realm was a brutally difficult A-rank hunt targeting a mutated ogre king. Undeterred by the dangerous rank, the little hero cheerfully declared it would be a total breeze for them, leaving Diana with no choice but to awkwardly play along. As Lillian eagerly pumped herself up for the mission, Diana quietly sighed, hoping that this relentless tailing would at least yield some meaningful progress in their relationship. 3 days later, their horse-drawn carriage rolled along a dirt road as Arya cried out in awe at the sight of the colossal world tree Yggdrasil rising above the forest canopy. She leaned out of the carriage with wide-eyed excitement, marveling at how the iconic landmark was already visible from so far away. Ishua smiled beside her, explaining that the legendary tree had protected the elven village for 2,000 years, using its immense power to continually purify the land's corrupting miasma. Legend told of an angel sowing a seed of miracles in a realm overrun by monsters. From that single seed grew a colossal tree that cleansed the surrounding land of toxicity, allowing human settlements to thrive along its perimeter. Recalling the story fondly, she beamed with joy, eager to finally gaze upon the world tree in person. Ishua took comfort in her happiness, knowing how deeply she had cherished that legend since her childhood. As they drew closer, however, his expression darkened with subtle apprehension. Though distant, he sensed an unsettling disturbance in the natural flow of mana surrounding the sacred tree, feeling an unnatural irregularity lurking beneath the surface. Staring off at the distant silhouette rising against the horizon, he silently hoped his bad premonition was merely a trick of his imagination. Meanwhile, near the foot of the mountain, Diana carved through swarms of ferocious monsters while Lillian wailed in distress over losing track of Ishua's trail. The air grew stifling as dense miasma enveloped the trail, straining their lungs with every breath. Diana gasped for air, shocked by the overwhelming concentration of monsters so close to the World Tree's main road. Recognizing her companion's distress, Lillian quickly cast a high-level healing spell, wrapping Diana in warm, restorative magic that cleared her throat and eased her breathing. Reinvigorated, they pressed on to find their target, wondering if the toxic miasma had caused the local wildlife to mutate. Suddenly, a colossal, grotesque creature blocked their path, the A-rank target itself, a mutated Ogre King variant. Seizing the initiative, Diana lunged forward with a fierce strike to clear the quest. To her horror, her sword bounced harmlessly off the monster's hide, leaving her open and dismayed as her attack failed to leave a scratch. She realized the true danger before them. By absorbing the dense surrounding miasma, the Ogre King had evolved, ascending to an S-rank threat. Knowing they had to act quickly, she and her young companion resolved to draw the beast's focus, buying time for their next move. To alter the flow of battle, the young hero tapped into her ultimate ability, expending an immense amount of magical energy to drag both her allies and the towering enemy into a self-created pocket realm. In an instant, reality folded around them, manifesting the inherent barrier known as the fantasy world. Within this cheat-level domain, a power truly worthy of a hero, the rules of engagement shifted entirely, giving them an absolute tactical advantage over the trapped monster. With the inviolable territory tailored precisely to her desires, the young caster called out, signaling that it was time for her comrade to deliver the decisive blow. Fueled by the domain's power, she envisioned the ultimate blade capable of slicing through anything, leaping high into the air as a radiant construct of pure force materialized in her hands. With fury blazing in her eyes, the swordswoman roared a declaration of victory, pouring every ounce of her spirit into the descending strike. The massive energy blade slammed down onto the monster with catastrophic impact, carving into the ground and prompting an immediate cry of triumph from her companion. Yet, instead of cleaving the beast in two, her edge hit rubbery skin that absorbingly compressed, bouncing the strike harmlessly away. Stunned by the complete failure of their ultimate assault, both warriors could only stare open-mouthed in utter disbelief. Her shock shattered the brief silence as a collective cry of disbelief echoed through the artificial domain. She stood alongside Lillian in total disbelief, unable to grasp how a special move capable of striking down one of the four heavenly kings had been deflected so effortlessly. Urging her to strike again while the domain remained active, Lillian warned that her mana was rapidly draining, questioning in sheer panic whether the monster's magic resistance was superior even to her hero skill. Driven by desperation, the swordsman launched a barrage of attacks, only to bounce uselessly off the monster's rubbery, indestructible hide with every attempt. Refusing to yield, she lunged forward one final time, but the giant countered with a brutal swing of its massive club, striking her down and knocking her weapon from her hand. The terrifying force sent her sailing helpless through the air, disarmed and defeated, leaving Lillian to scream out in sheer anguish. With her protector thrown clear across the battlefield, the massive mutated threat turned its gaze onto the young hero, casting a dark shadow over her petite frame. Faced with immediate demise, panic seized the child as she realized her journey could end here, leaving her grand dream of defeating the Demon King completely unfulfilled. The hideous beast raised its heavy bludgeon high, sneering with wicked glee as it prepared to crush her into oblivion. Yet in that fleeting second before impact, the memory of Ishua flashed brightly across her mind, striking her with a powerful determination that she had not yet done anything to repay him. She gasped as an eerie, disorienting void suddenly swallowed their surroundings, causing her companions to cry out in confusion and urge each other to hold tight. Proclaiming the boundary as her own inviolable sanctuary, she declared that this private utopia was under her total control, a realm where no soul could enter or leave without her explicit permission. Yet, to her absolute shock, Ishua and Arya materialized right beside her within the forbidden space, leaving her trembling as she struggled to comprehend how they had breached her absolute territory. Eager party members and ambitious warriors desperately crowded around young Lillian, begging the genius girl to allow them into her party. Yet behind her back, Alan harbored bitter jealousy, scoffing that she had done nothing to earn her hero skill beyond mere chance, while secretly plotting how easily he could deceive and manipulate the naive girl to win her over. Unmoved by the clamor around her, she turned on her heel and walked away, her small boots stepping firmly across the grand hall. She ran frantically through the forest path, tripping and stumbling onto the dirt ground. Her precious plush bear tumbled from her grasp, but she quickly clutched it back against her chest and forced herself to stand. As tears welled in her eyes, the sheer weight of her fear and loneliness overwhelmed her. Weeping softly, a comforting memory stirred within her heart, a gentle voice asking if she was all right. That memory recalled the image of Ishua reaching down toward her, offering a warm and compassionate smile. Snapping back to the horrific reality, a massive monster towered directly above her, brandishing a heavy wooden club prepared to strike. Gritting her teeth through the terror, she refused to yield, fiercely resolving that her journey would not end in a place like this. Glancing upward with tear-filled eyes, the memory of the young man who had shown her kindness reflected in her iris, fueling her determination to survive so she could repay him. Suddenly, chaotic shouts rang out through the area as companion voices called out in surprise and confusion. Further down the path, Ishua walked calmly alongside Riril, unaware of the situation until a sudden turn brought them face to face with the unexpected encounter. Turning around in surprise, he locked eyes with the young girl, who gasped his name in quiet disbelief. She could barely process the monster's sudden attack before Ishua flashed into motion, stepping directly in front of her to deflect the blow with swift precision. Turning to check on her safety, he recalled having seen her near the castle, prompting her to stammer out a flustered expression of gratitude, while Diana looked on in total bewilderment, wondering how he knew her name. A memory flashed through his mind of the protective bond between Diana and the young girl back at the royal grounds, clarifying why their faces were so familiar. Shaken by his sudden arrival, Diana struggled to comprehend how anyone could have breached this isolated spatial barrier, while he remained puzzled as to why she was present in such a perilous zone. Rewinding the clock to a few hours prior, Riril had been happily blasting magic across the landscape, fired up by her grand ambition to witness the legendary World Tree in person. However, upon arriving at the entrance of the elf village, their path was abruptly blocked by guards who announced that visiting the World Tree was strictly forbidden and restricted to official personnel. Perplexed because her guidebook explicitly described the area as an open tourist destination, she responded to the unexpected barrier by casting devastating holy magic at the monsters crawling around the perimeter. As holy light reduced the undead hordes to ash, she voiced her frustration, complaining that she had never heard of ordinary travelers being denied access to an elf village before. A relentless barrage of high-tier spells illuminated the area, annihilating entire groups of formidable beasts in massive bursts of pure energy. Surrounded by the corpses of A-rank monsters that usually populated the demon realm, he walked beside her in utter disbelief at how effortlessly she was clearing a path through such high-level threats. He watched in bewildered awe as his junior companion effortlessly obliterated a high-ranking monster with a single holy spell. Seeing her casually defeat an A-rank beast left him both impressed and slightly unnerved by her staggering growth rate. As he noted the dense miasma suffocating the landscape around them, he realized that decisive action was needed. Harnessing his unique magic, he cast a specialized mana link field to filter the toxic air and accelerate their mana recovery. With the surrounding air cleansed by his spell, he pushed further toward the elf village perimeter, observing that the environmental decay had reached a point where no living creature could survive. Peering through the thick canopy that obscured the World Tree, he began to realize that what was supposed to be a simple or fictitious assignment had turned into a genuine, dangerous crisis. Before he could ponder the matter any longer, a sudden disturbance in the ambient mana caught his attention, prompting him to warn his companion and hurry toward the anomaly. Reaching the source of the pulse, he stood astonished beside his partner as a vast, shimmering grid of complex magical structures manifested directly in the middle of the forest. Examining the glowing phenomenon, he quickly discerned that space itself was being artificially distorted, leading him to suspect this barrier was the true origin of the miasma. Refusing to be intimidated by the overwhelming complexity of the spatial magic, he focused his perception and managed to analyze the core constructs of the intricate barrier. His swift analysis allowed him to unseal the barrier, and instructing his companion to stay close, he led the way into the newly revealed pocket realm. Hearing this unbelievable story recounted in the present, the young mage gaped in utter disbelief that anyone could analyze and breach her prized fantasy world spell. She stood in disbelief, marveling at how effortlessly he had analyzed the spatial distortion, a high-level magic that even skilled spellcasters could barely comprehend. As she questioned whether the space itself was tied to his unique ability, her awe only deepened at the realization of his true talent. Before she could voice her doubts any further, a sudden tremor shook the ground, interrupting her thoughts as a towering, grotesquely mutated creature loomed over them with a sinister grin. The hideous beast was a mutated ogre king, its swollen form heavily saturated with dense miasma that amplified its monstrous strength far beyond normal limits. Ishua calmly signaled for his companion to stay back for the moment, maintaining a cool, collected composure despite the imminent threat facing them. After ensuring her mana had been entirely replenished in an instant through his support, he immediately called out to Arya to inquire about Diana's condition. Across the clearing, Lillian watched with immense relief as Arya rushed over to render immediate assistance to the fallen swordmaster. Awakening to see familiar faces amidst the crisis, Diana gasped in surprise, questioning why both Arya and Ishua were present in such a dangerous domain. Refusing to let the toxic affliction linger, Arya channeled a potent surge of purifying energy, effortlessly neutralizing the deep-seated miasma that Diana had inhaled. As a soothing lightness returned to her body, Diana marveled at the miraculous recovery, while Ishua explained that miasma was merely a dangerous composite of curses and mana that could be systematically cancelled using opposing magical principles. Recognizing that mana porters lacked direct spellcasting capabilities, Ishua reflected on the necessity of mastering spell analysis and attribute interactions to overcome their perceived limitations, even as Riril stepped forward, conjuring bright flames to confront the mutated giant. She watched alongside the others as hero Lillian launched a furious aerial assault against the massive ogre king, raining blows down while Ishua and the party looked on in awe at the sheer display of force. Despite her desperate barrage, the hero turned back with a somber farewell, believing the beast too formidable to defeat, only to pause in utter bewilderment as she realized her attacks had left not a single scratch on the monster. Driven by self-sacrificing resolve, she swore upon her pride as a hero to buy them precious time, ready to lay down her life to protect the group. Looking at her tiny frame standing bravely between them and danger, he couldn't help but admire her nobility, realizing just how vastly different she was from the arrogant hero Alan. Stepping up beside her with calm assurance, he reassured the startled hero that the monstrous foe was far from unbeatable. Turning to Arya, he gave the signal for their routine protocol, leaving Lillian wide-eyed and confused as to what they were planning. With him supplying limitless mana to fuel her spells, she launched a continuous barrage of high-level party buffs and recovery magic, completely eliminating mana constraints and rendering their front line practically invincible. Reinvigorated and surging with incredible power, she led the charge straight back toward the massive mutant beast with overwhelming momentum. Striking the creature with a holy nova, her amplified attack cut deep, though the monster's immense durability ensured that defeating it would still require a prolonged battle of attrition. Watching the clash from the backlands, he observed that promoted mutants possessed extraordinary resilience, and quietly pondered how he could best swing the tide of battle. He channeled an immense torrent of holy attribute mana directly into the mutated beast, flooding its body with radiant magic. As the light engulfed the creature, he calmly explained the logic behind his plan, noting that defeating an opponent promoted by miasma required a simple solution: neutralizing the corrupted energy with opposing holy magic. Diana watched in realization, recognizing how this purification echoed her own past experiences with dark curses. Deprived of the miasma that sustained its monstrous transformation, the Ogre King shrank dramatically, its swollen physique deflating back to its original form. Seeing the beast weaken to its base state, Diana declared that there was no longer any need to prolong the encounter. Arya urged caution, reminding her that while the enemy had been stripped of its unnatural boost, it still posed a formidable threat that required a methodical, careful strike to finish. Before Diana could move, hero Lillian stepped forward, focusing her boundless energy to manifest a legendary blade capable of cutting through any defense. Overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of output she unleashed, Ishua marveled at the true destructive potential of a hero's power as she prepared her final blow. With a swift, blinding arc of pure magic, the hero's blade sliced effortlessly through the target, putting a definitive end to the battle. In the peaceful moments following the creature's defeat, Diana formally introduced the bashful young hero to the group, urging the trembling girl to greet their benefactor properly. When Ishua kindly extended a handshake and mentioned recognizing her from their brief encounter at the royal castle during Alan's party, Lillian was overcome with sheer inner ecstasy, screaming internally with delight that he had remembered her. As the companions set off along the forest trail, they quietly noted how surprisingly meek Lillian seemed compared to her fierce reputation, while also expressing deep concern over the presence of dark miasma so close to the sacred world tree. Resolving to investigate further, the group decided to return to the elf village, knowing that dealing with a hero required clear communication and a shared understanding of the looming threat. As he and his companions journeyed down the narrow forest path, the colossal silhouette of the world tree came into full view, only for them to realize with horror that its majestic canopy was beginning to wither. And looking ahead, the companions were struck with horror as they realized the colossal world tree looming in the distance had begun to wither. Spurred by the alarming sight, Lillian clutched her plush bear tightly and urged the group to move quickly toward the elf village. Taking the lead, she sprinted ahead through the wooden gates, demonstrating remarkable composure in an emergency, while the others recognized her leadership and pressed forward together. She boldly declared her identity as Hero Lillian, announcing that her party had arrived to investigate the strange occurrences around the elf village, which left the Elven Guard questioning if she was truly genuine. The guard voiced his deep misgivings, explaining that ever since a man claiming to be a hero had entered their lands, peculiar troubles had begun, making him fearful that she might be yet another imposter. Hearing of the impending trouble, Ishua immediately stepped forward to offer their help in checking out the situation, while Lillian quickly relinquished full responsibility to the rest of her companions. As the group pressed onward into the settlement, Diana grumbled about having to rush through their visit, while Arya mournfully lamented the sudden ruin of their peaceful sightseeing trip. Upon speaking with the local inhabitants inside their central hall, Ishua was caught completely off guard by the critical details they shared. Before they could fully process the news, a strangely familiar voice echoed across the open space, causing Ishua to stop dead in his tracks with a look of utter shock. Turning toward the sound, the entire party gasped as they found Alan standing nearby, unable to fathom his unexpected presence in the Elven territory. This encounter recalled events from a few days prior, when Alan stood trembling in rage before the king, inwardly cursing his former party members for abandoning him just as he was summoned to report his achievements. Having been urgently recalled from his stay in Nabish, he had been forced to journey back to the royal capital and present himself before the throne. At court, royal officials had showered praise upon Hero Lillian for slaying Ifrit, one of the demon lords for heavenly kings, creating an unbearable burden of expectation for Alan to deliver equally grand results. He stood before the royal audience, struggling to deliver his report as the official prompted him to proceed. Questioned if a minor level gain was all he had to report, the young hero stammered, admitting his progress had been minimal. Desperate to save face, he hastily boasted about his ongoing efforts in an A-rank dungeon, promising to conquer it soon before tackling an S-rank challenge. Cutting off his empty bravado, the king barked in exasperation, tired of hearing the same repetitive reports and demanding to know where Ishua was to give a real update. Cold sweat broke out across his face as panic set in, terrified of what the court would do if they discovered his entire party had abandoned him. Blurted out in desperation, his lie that Ishua was simply feeling unwell immediately drew an anxious outburst from the concerned king. He quickly added that Saint Arya was looking after Ishua to buy time, privately planning to dodge further scrutiny until he could achieve a major victory on his own. Though a lingering shadow of suspicion remained in his gaze, the monarch ultimately let the explanation pass. The king then handed down an urgent request, commanding him to consult with Ishua and proceed with the mission immediately. Bound by the royal mandate, he journeyed by carriage toward the elf lands, arriving at last before the colossal expanse of the world tree, Yggdrasil. He argued heatedly with the border guard at the checkpoint, demanding to know why the road ahead was blocked. The soldier explained that reports of dangerous, high-ranking monsters had forced them to quarantine the region, though he himself insisted he had encountered no such beasts during his journey. As the soldier went on to describe the renowned new hero who had recently passed through, a small girl rumored to be noble and striking, he dismissed the praise with contempt, privately mocking her recklessness for charging into restricted territory without proper preparation. Picturing that small girl alongside the formidable swordswoman traveling with her, he realized this was the perfect opportunity to wipe away his past failures. By single-handedly solving the crisis, he could frame his actions as coming to the rescue of a careless rival. Settling back into his carriage as it rolled smoothly toward the destination, he celebrated his good fortune, confident that the rumors of fierce beasts were absurdly exaggerated and that the quest would be an effortless triumph. A dark, arrogant smirk spread across his face as his thoughts shifted to his former companion, anticipating the moment he would confront him and force him to acknowledge his superiority. Shortly thereafter, the carriage arrived at the serene borders of the elf village, where wooden houses and towering fences rose silently under the forest canopy. Stepping down from his transport, he approached the entrance steps, where an armed elven sentry stood guard before the heavy wooden doors. The sentry narrowed his eyes upon seeing him, coldly stating that outsiders were strictly forbidden from entering without explicit permission. Unfazed by the cold reception, he flashed an official royal crest and loudly announced his status as a royal hero on an official investigation, demanding to know if the young female hero was inside. Although the guards expressed disbelief that a lone hero would be traveling without a party, a clear voice echoed from beyond the gate, granting him passage into the village. He stood before the regal figure of Chelsea, the elf queen, who formally introduced herself and explained that their crisis could no longer be hidden, necessitating human assistance, though his immediate reaction was merely admiring her appearance. As an elf guard roughly ushered him forward, the queen implored him to refrain from anything foolish, grimly warning that the unfolding crisis could escalate into a major turmoil capable of engulfing the entire world. Hearing the gravity of her words, a drop of sweat rolled down his brow as he internally questioned whether the situation was truly that dire, and if it was even something within his power to resolve. Before he could dwell further on his hesitation, a senior elf confronted him directly, demanding a full accounting of his achievements as a hero thus far. Stepping deeper into the settlement, the young warrior privately resolved to hear their side of the story first, while secretly deciding he would make a swift exit if the danger proved too overwhelming. As he made his way along the village paths, he noted the somber atmosphere surrounding the locals, with children huddled together anxiously and adults speaking in hushed, worried tones. Turning to his guide, he inquired if any other heroes had arrived ahead of him, but the elf informed him that he was the only human who had entered recently due to the village's strict lockdown. This revelation caught him off guard as he realized Lillian was nowhere to be found, leaving him to wonder if he should seek her out first while noting how truly dismal the elves' expressions were. A memory surfaced of the king lavishly praising hero Lillian for her remarkable feat of defeating Ifrit, one of the demon kings formidable for heavenly kings. Arriving at his final destination within the village, a surge of fierce ambition took hold of him, realizing that if he solved this crisis on his own, the king would have no choice but to acknowledge his true worth. He stood small before the monumental trunk of the world tree, Yggdrasil, which towered high into the canopy above. Up close, the sheer scale of the massive, tangled root structures was overwhelming, dwarfing the entire party as they gathered at its base. As he closely examined the giant trunk, a nervous bead of sweat rolled down his cheek when a troubling detail caught his attention. Looking closer at the lower sections, the party discovered that the sacred roots were blackened and visibly decaying. Queen Chelsea confirmed his worst fears, explaining that the miasma purification had failed and Yggdrasil was rapidly draining of all life. The gravity of the situation hit him hard. If this decay continued unchecked, the entire region would soon become completely uninhabitable. Panicking internally, he tried to construct an excuse to flee, but Queen Chelsea turned to him directly, asking if he could resolve the crisis. Memories of the king dismissing him and demanding issue flashed through his mind, refueling his desperate pride. Suppressing his terror behind a confident mask, he declared boldly that as a hero, they could leave the problem entirely to him. While the elves cheered at his declaration, he screamed internally at his own impulsive boast, knowing he now had no choice but to see it through. He stepped forward with arrogant confidence, dismissing the ancient tree's affliction as a minor inconvenience that his magic could easily fix. As the Queen of the Elves and her attendants watched in quiet anticipation, he scoffed at the notion that a specialized team of elven mages had failed where he was certain to succeed. Pressing his hands toward the blackened bark, he channeled his energy and invoked a powerful high-tier spell, casting Resurrection to restore the decaying wood. Internally, he gloated over his secret mastery of advanced recovery magic, proud that he possessed divine healing capabilities while maintaining his role on the front lines without the rest of his party ever knowing. But as the glowing aura vanished, the rotted root remained completely untouched, leaving him frozen in utter bewilderment. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead under the watchful eyes of the elven court, a sudden wave of panic crashing over him as he realized his standard restorative spells were utterly useless. Desperate to preserve his reputation, he stammered a hasty excuse about the spell being a mere warm-up, all while inwardly questioning if the miasma had inflicted a specialized status condition. He hastily unleashed a flurry of secondary spells, shouting invocations for purification and detoxifying magic in a frantic attempt to cleanse the decay. The elven onlookers watched in silent disappointment, knowing that miasma was a complex fusion of curses and corrupted mana that no simple remedy could ever cleanse. Gritting his teeth in anger, terror gripped his heart as he contemplated the humiliating prospect of returning to the king empty-handed after making such grand promises. Glancing further along the massive root system, his eyes locked onto a bizarre, swollen mass bulging unnaturally from the subterranean landscape, deeply discolored from absorbing immense quantities of miasma. He gripped the hilt of his weapon, a cocky grin spreading across his face as he claimed to have finally unraveled the truth of the situation. As the anxious elves called out to question his intentions, he snapped back arrogantly, telling them to shut up and watch as he prepared to demonstrate the true power of a hero. Channeling his magic into the blade, he invoked the power of his holy sword, commanding it to manifest its full strength. With a deafening battle cry, he brought the glowing sword down in a ferocious strike, slicing directly into the massive swollen root mass, while Queen Chelsea and the elves watched in utter horror. Confused by their terror, he turned to glance back at them, only for Queen Chelsea to scream in despair, asking if he had completely lost his mind. He stubbornly defended his action, explaining that since miasma had concentrated in that swollen segment, severing the infected source was the obvious way to cure the tree. Instead of curing the tree, dark torrents of volatile miasma erupted violently from the severed root, surging rapidly upward into the trunk. His arrogance vanished into immediate panic as he saw the corruption spreading uncontrollably, while the elf queen and her attendants collapsed to their knees in complete despair. Across the cavernous depth beneath the tree, dark waves of miasma consumed Yggdrasil's inner structure, pushing the great world tree to the brink of death. Stunned and speechlessly recoiling, he could only listen as Queen Chelsea revealed the tragic truth. Those swollen roots were Yggdrasil's natural defense mechanism, created specifically to wall off and contain the miasma that he had just unleashed. He found himself surrounded by furious elven voices accusing him of colluding with the Demon King and demanding to know how he would make amends, leaving the young warrior stammering in sheer panic as he tried to deny their accusations. Overwhelmed by the barrage of blame, he clutched his head in desperation, shouting back that he had been completely ignorant of the tree's true nature and had no idea this would happen. With cold sweat trickling down his face, he desperately attempted to shift the responsibility away from himself, stuttering out excuses as his composure crumbled under the weight of his colossal mistake. Before he could utter another excuse, a familiar voice suddenly cut through the hostile noise, calling out his name in utter disbelief. His breath hitched as the sound registered, his teeth gritting together in disbelief as he recognized the voice immediately. Looking up toward the balcony, he saw the black-haired man standing calmly among the elven nobles, prompting him to roar in fury and demand why his former companion had. Standing at the edge of the wooden bridge overlooking the roots of the world tree, the group confronted Alan, demanding to know if he had done something to alter the ancient tree. Furious, the young hero demanded an explanation for why he would act so recklessly, but he coldly countered that his action was necessary, explaining that he had severed the roots responsible for sealing the miasma. Turning her gaze toward the small, hooded newcomer, the elf queen inquired about her identity with a quiet curiosity. She proudly introduced herself as Hero Lillian, formally addressing her as the sovereign of the elves, but the elven leader bitterly rejected the title, declaring that anyone unable to protect Yggdrasil and the village no longer deserved to be called a queen. Overwhelmed by the horror of her perceived failure, her eyes widened in sheer despair as she faced the ruin of her realm. Refusing to let the sovereign lose hope, the spirited girl offered a resolute smile, reassuring her that it was far too early to surrender to despair. She had barely finished speaking to the queen when Ishua pressed his palm against the massive bark of the world tree, sensing a tiny, flickering ember of life deep within its core. Realizing there was still hope, he turned to the gathering and called out, insisting that Yggdrasil was still alive and pleading for a chance to heal it. The elf attendants erupted in anger and disbelief, refusing to trust another human after the devastation Alan had just caused. Undeterred by the hostility around them, the young hero leaned close to Queen Chelsea, acknowledging that Ishua was currently nothing more than a novice adventurer and a simple mana porter. Yet, with absolute conviction in her voice, she offered her personal guarantee as one chosen by fate. She declared with an unwavering smile that he was destined to eventually become the man who would save the entire world. Intrigued by such unshakable faith, Queen Chelsea looked across the clearing toward the quiet youth, who gave a gentle, reassuring wave in return. His dark eyes sharpened with quiet determination, ready to shoulder the monumental task before him. Moved by the hero's unwavering confidence, Queen Chelsea commanded her shocked attendants to stand down and allow him to make the attempt. As the elves restrained a shouting Alan in the background, Queen Chelsea reasoned that taking a chance was far better than watching Yggdrasil perish, while Ishua approached the bark, mindful of the sudden weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He pressed his palm flat against the ancient bark of the world tree, instantly feeling the sluggish, uneven flow of magical energy. The thick impurity caused by Alan's lingering miasma had infected the wood, severely impeding the tree's natural mana circulation. Realizing that trying to neutralize such widespread corruption directly would wither the tree before the process finished, he devised a tactical alternative. Conjuring a bright, spinning glyph, he focused on isolating the damaged section that had been severed during the violent battle. Throwing his arms wide, he unleashed a specialized spell array, a distorted magic circle designed to act as a localized mana hole. The nearby elven observers gasped in shock as the pitch-black miasma began swirling wildly, drawn violently into the glowing center of the strange spell. He had engineered the technique by creating an intentional imbalance in elemental density, because higher density attributes naturally migrate toward lower density voids. The dense dark miasma was forced to siphon into his circle, a method originally intended to steal magic from dangerous monsters. Expanding his strategy across the massive trunk, he manifested multiple identical circles in rapid succession to create widespread extraction points. Recognizing that the tree's upper height exceeded his physical reach, he called out directly to young hero Lillian, asking her to place matching spell arrays high up in the most corrupt branches. Caught off guard by his sudden call, her heart fluttered before she blurted out an enthusiastic agreement. Leaping into action along the high branches, she efficiently deployed the spell circles one after another, all the while marveling in secret at the sheer impossibility of his miraculous mana control. Watching the dark miasma clear under their combined effort, Queen Chelsea and her royal court stood frozen in astonishment, amazed that such an unorthodox cleansing method could actually restore Yggdrasil. While the elf queen pondered what kind of incredible entity stood before them, he simply flashed a relaxed, modest grin, reminding her that he was merely a humble mana porter as he spurred Lillian to keep up the effort. As he pushed his mana to its absolute limit, the surrounding elven guards gasped in utter disbelief, realizing a genuine glimmer of hope had finally appeared. However, that fragile hope was immediately threatened as a massive horde of monsters swarmed toward the elven village, threatening to break through the outer barricades. Observing the chaotic surge from afar, Queen Chelsea realized the gravity of the situation, warning her commander that an abnormal monster outbreak at a time like this could trigger a full-scale stampede. Gritting his teeth under the immense pressure, the young man knew he could not stop now. The World Tree's purifying ability had completely halted, driving the surrounding beasts into an ever more violent frenzy. Though relieved to have Lillian assisting him, he acknowledged that neither of them could afford to abandon their posts while the ritual was underway. Grasping her sword with a confident smile, Diana admitted to Arya that she had been growing anxious just standing around with nothing to do. Maintaining his glowing magic arrays, he called out to Diana and Arya, asking them to hold off the horde until the World Tree was cleansed and the monsters weakened. Without hesitation, the Sword Saint voiced her agreement and dashed forward. Reaching the upper ramparts alongside Arya, the swordswoman reassured her companion that the heavy walls extended all the way down, preventing the beasts from breaching below before turning her attention to the battle ahead. Down below, a terrifying legion of winged gargoyles, cyclopes, and goblins marched forward, presenting a formidable challenge for their first combined fight. As ferocious wolf creatures leaped between the tall trees toward the barricade, she maintained her cool composure, deciding to let the elven archers pick off the advancing beasts from the wooden walls first. She charged directly down the narrow path, keeping her eyes fixed firmly on the incoming threat as the monsters surged forward. Right behind her, the saint channeled her divine energy, unleashing a massive radiant blast of holy nova directly into the front line of the horde. With divine light searing through the air, the swordswoman drew her blade and carved through multiple beasts in a single, devastating strike. Glancing back, she marveled at the sheer destructive potential of the holy nova, amazed that the saint could generate such overwhelming firepower without any external mana support. A local elf handed over the last remaining mana potions from the village, prompting the saint to immediately weave temporary enhancements for enhanced sharpness and protection onto her ally's sword and body. Bolstered by divine magic, the sword saint lowered her center of gravity and swept her blade in a full rotational arc, severing a dozen monsters simultaneously. Together, their combined offense created an impenetrable wall of light and steel, clearing large swaths of the battlefield in seconds. Watching from the rear, the elf queen stood speechless, her heart pounding in disbelief at the raw power wielded by the members of the hero's party. Yet despite their valiant defense, the forest continued to disgorge an endless sea of dark creatures, threatening to overrun the ramparts by sheer weight of numbers. Meanwhile, inside the sacred sanctuary, the young man and Lillian pushed their mana reserves to the absolute limit, casting multiple mana holes to complete the massive World Tree's purification before the outer defenses fell. He silently urged Arya and Diana to hold the line just a bit longer, knowing every second bought precious time for the purification ritual. As the relentless assault wore on, Diana grimaced from exhaustion, but Arya quickly stepped in to cast a restorative healing spell over her battered ally. Thanking the saint for the swift relief, the swordswoman caught her breath, admitting that while the endless horde was becoming tedious, it was hardly a surprise. Arya raised another grave concern. pointing out that the dark miasma surrounding them was rapidly thickening while their supply of mana potions had completely run out. Facing the growing threat, Diana barked orders to the elven defenders to cut down any beasts attempting to scale the wooden barricades, mentally cursing the delay of any potential reinforcements. Yet a resolute smile cracked across her face as she rallied the line, reminding everyone that their true goal was simply to buy enough time for the world tree to recover. Meanwhile, near the center of the village, Queen Chelsea checked on the status of her people's evacuation, receiving word that civilians were fleeing out the back gates just as the outer perimeter began to falter. Gazing up at the imposing world tree, the queen noted that while the dark miasma was being steadily drained, the horde threatened to breach their sanctuary before the purification was complete. Sensing a dramatic shift in the atmosphere, Ishua realized that the dark miasma had finally faded and mana was beginning to flow freely once more, even as the elven troops rallied for an all-out battle at the main gates. Above them, the majestic boughs of the world tree surged with brilliant light and magical runes, signaling that the long-awaited restoration was mere moments away from completion. Metal scrapes brutally against armor plate with a harsh, echoing clash as an enemy attack lands. Taking the brunt of the strike, Diana lets out a pained gasp while Arya cries out in alarm, stepping forward with her staff to support her. Struggling to raise her holy symbol, she desperately attempts to channel a restorative healing spell, only for her divine light to falter as her mana runs completely dry. Noticing the young priestess's sudden collapse of magic, the Sword Saint barks an urgent command to the elf defenders behind them to escort Arya safely to the rear. Left alone on the front line against the advancing horde of goblins, cyclopes, and gargoyles, she grits her teeth under the crushing pressure of the assault. Moments later, desperate shouts echo through the air as the heavy wooden barricade groans and cracks under the weight of the swarming monsters. As the barrier splinters and the beasts surge into the defensive perimeter, her eyes widen in horror at the sudden breach. Wiping sweat and dirt from her cheek, she lets out a breath, a faint, weary smile breaking across her face at the sheer absurdity of their predicament. Stealing her resolve once more, the legendary warrior adjusts her stance, inwardly scoffing at the twist of fate that requires her to prepare for death twice in a single day. Shouting back toward Lillian with a fierce grin, she vows that if they manage to survive this nightmare, they will be restarting their grueling training from scratch. She stood her ground amidst the encroaching pressure, quietly observing that this dire situation was precisely the kind of crisis where Ishua's presence would be invaluable. Suddenly, high above against the blazing sun, two heroic figures leapt into the fray straight from the sky. With a blinding streak of energy, Mithia descended, unleashing the devastating magic sword Graham to cleave through the advancing horde in a single strike. Right beside her, Riril raised her staff and channeled a tempest of magic, unleashing thunder of judgment to vaporize the remaining creatures in columns of holy lightning. Stunned by the overwhelming display of force, Diana and Lillian could only stare in utter disbelief as their unexpected allies landed effortlessly right in front of them. With the immediate threat eradicated, Mithia and Riril stood ready, turning the tide of battle just when all hope seemed. A few weeks after Alan's party failed to conquer an A-rank dungeon, a self-important man boastfully proclaimed his renown throughout the continent, eliciting only a mild, unimpressed response from Lillian and Mithia. Standing before high authorities, the companions received solemn words of encouragement, with officials expressing great expectations for their future endeavors. Meanwhile, Alan remained behind, sitting alone in silence as his former standing slipped away. Setting out on their new path, Lillian eagerly declared their intention to follow Lady Ishua and make haste toward the town of Nabish, brushing aside the desperate pleas of those around them. Their travel, however, was violently disrupted when winged demonic beasts swarmed from the sky, ambushing carriages and guards along the highway. Annoyed by the sudden ambush, she voiced her frustration at the poorly maintained roads, while Mithia remained resolute about reaching Nabish without further delay. She stood side by side with her companion, both resolved to take action. Mithia declared with full confidence that if Ishua were in their place, he would undoubtedly step in to help those in distress. Memories of their shared past rushed back. The chaotic battles fought, the struggles survived, and the unyielding resolve demonstrated by their allies through every trial. Fired up by the spirit of her comrades, Lillian drew her blade, shouting with wild enthusiasm that she was ready to unleash her full strength against the horde of flying beasts. As her eager companion charged recklessly into battle, Mithia could only stare in bewilderment, completely unable to comprehend how things had escalated so rapidly. After successfully repelling the ambush, a horse-drawn wagon rolled peacefully along the quiet countryside road, transporting the travelers and survivors away from the danger zone. Inside the moving carriage, the two weighed their options. Though reaching Nabish was their priority, they could not abandon defenseless travelers whose guards had been lost, agreeing to escort them to safety first. Despite the good deed, Mithia remained visibly drained, still trying to make sense of how their urgent quest had taken such an unexpected side trip. That detour unexpectedly brought them to an ornate estate, where an extravagant feast featuring a roasted bird and delicate side dishes was served beneath glowing chandeliers. Seated at the lavish table, Lillian gleefully devoured the gourmet spread, while Mithia sat rigid and confused by the sheer opulence of their reward. The wealthy lord of the manor expressed his overwhelming gratitude, explaining that the medicine carried by the rescued wagon was precisely what saved his gravely ill daughter. While Mithia marveled at the astounding twist of fate and suggested resuming their journey, Lillian begged for just a bit more time to eat. She politely declined the lord's generous offer of permanent employment, explaining that as humble adventurers, bound service within a noble household was not suited to their free-spirited lifestyle. In response, the wealthy lord pressed his hands together in a desperate plea, protesting that his ancestors would never forgive him if he allowed the saviors of his daughter to depart with nothing more than a single meal, begging them to stay for at least one night. Seeing his overwhelming earnestness, the two companions exchanged a hesitant look, unable to immediately turn down such a heartfelt entreaty. Yielding to his persistence, they ultimately agreed to spend the night beneath the grand chandeliers of the opulent estate. However, one night quickly turned into an agonizing delay, leaving Mithia staring blankly in utter exasperation. A full week slipped by as their host repeatedly pleaded for them to extend their stay just one more day, prompting Mithia to finally sit up in bed and demand they head for Nabish immediately. Admitting her own lack of urgency, Lillian conjured a gentle spark of fire magic, explaining that because Lady Ishua was known to be staying in Nabish for a while, she had allowed herself to lower her guard and relax. Having finally gathered the resolve to depart, the pair bid their farewells while the lord and his staff waved enthusiastically from the courtyard, welcoming them back anytime. With the mansion behind them, the open road stretched ahead through the mountain forest, signaling that the long-awaited moment to reunite with Lady Ishua had arrived. Yet, even as they walked onward, Mithia was still left shaking her head in disbelief over how a single night had somehow spun out into an entire week. She stood in disbelief alongside Lillian upon arriving at the guild desk, realizing their relaxed pace had cost them dearly when told Ishua was nowhere to be found. Upon hearing that Ishua had departed for the elven village on a special request, Lillian offered to pursue him immediately, only for the attendant to reveal that recent royal decrees had sealed off the entire surrounding area. Refusing to sit idly by, the young warrior pressed for another solution, though the receptionist lamented that the king's mandate left them with no choice but to comply. A sudden idea struck her, leading her to ask if Ishua had left behind a massive backlog of unfulfilled community requests. With burning resolve, she announced that they would take up his mantle and fulfill every single leftover quest in his stead. Without losing a moment, she plunged into a flurry of exhausting labor, battling monsters, gathering items, helping townsfolk, and hauling heavy supplies. Returning to the desk out of breath, she eagerly demanded even more jobs, thoroughly bewildering the guild attendant with her boundless energy. As they headed outside, she gleefully celebrated her effort, convinced that Ishua would shower her with praise once he returned. Her companion could only watch in quiet bafflement, completely unable to comprehend the logic driving such intense enthusiasm for mundane chores. Moments later, the pair took flight across the sky, carried onward toward their next objective beneath the wings of a massive bird. She hung suspended high in the sky alongside her friend, held securely within the massive talons of an enormous bird soaring through the clouds. Snapping back to consciousness, the swordswoman turned to her quiet companion in absolute shock, calling out her name. Realizing she had drifted off during their journey, she began to panic, while the young witch beside her remained entirely calm and unbothered. Dangling helplessly in midair, she flailed her legs and demanded to know how they had ended up in such a ridiculous predicament, accusing her friend of sleeping too much as well. Her memory suddenly rushed back, recalling how they had been out collecting Rengetsu herbs when the massive avian creature ambushed them from above and snatched them up. As the giant creature continued its steady flight over the wilderness, both travelers hung side by side in silence. Her mind quickly ran wild with horrifying possibilities, imagining the beast carrying them back to its nest only to feed them to a clutch of ravenous hatchlings. Refusing to accept such a gruesome fate, she vowed to leap to safety the moment the bird flew low enough to the ground. Yet, a sudden realization struck both of them. Being carried through the air by this wild beast might be their only way to bypass the king's strict blockade surrounding the elven village where Ishua was located. Accepting this absurd stroke of good fortune, she smiled cheerfully, deciding that staying captive on their feathered ride was the best path forward after all. She looked up at the massive creature carrying them, realizing that a beast of such immense size could only nest around the legendary world tree. As the giant bird glided smoothly through the open sky, their thoughts shifted toward the perilous condition of the great tree ahead. Looming on the horizon, the world tree appeared dramatically shattered, its massive crown severed as if struck down by a catastrophic force. With no hesitation, Lillian plummeted from the sky with her blade drawn, her expression fiercely determined as she prepared to join the fray below. Touching down directly in the center of a chaotic battlefield, the two allies found themselves instantly encircled by an overwhelming swarm of dark creatures. Moving with nimble grace, she brushed off a giant enemy's strike with a playful taunt before counterattacking with lethal precision. Her blade struck down into the dirt, releasing a powerful shockwave that threw the surrounding monsters off balance. Following up with a sweeping circular slash, she cleared the entire immediate area, sending multiple attackers hurtling through the air. At her side, Mithia channeled her magical power into concise, devastating bursts, effortlessly blasting back incoming hordes without wasting a drop of energy. Watching the flawless coordination from afar, Ishua noted with admiration how dramatically both fighters had improved at managing their mana during high-intensity combat over recent weeks. She observed the capable allies surrounding Hero Alan, marveling at how someone so flawed could be blessed with such exceptional companions. Meanwhile, Mithia tossed a mana potion to Arya, who accepted the vital supply with immense gratitude. Spurred by the gesture, the dark-haired warrior cut through a swath of approaching monsters, urging her comrades not to let their allies outshine them. Watching the swordswoman carve through the horde with fluid grace, Arya gasped in awe, wondering aloud about the identity of the powerful warrior. Suddenly, a confident shout echoed from above as another figure swooped down toward the sprawling host of beasts. It was Lillian, who made a dramatic entrance right in the thick of the fight, prompting instant recognition from Arya. The allies marveled at the legendary hero who had vanquished one of the four heavenly kings, their morale soaring at her arrival. Lillian flashed a resolute smile, explaining that Ishua was currently pouring mana to neutralize the miasma, and that they only needed to hold the line a bit longer. With renewed courage, the five heroines stood shoulder to shoulder, confident that together they could repel the monstrous tide. Seeing the front line firmly secured, Alan turned back to the world tree, placing his full trust in his senior to complete the rest. Glowing spell seals materialized around the swordswoman's wrists and ankles, steadying her descent as she channeled her energy into the surrounding air. Beneath her, the young man stood before the massive trunk of the world tree, extending his arms to manifest dozens of glowing magic circles across its bark. Watching from nearby, the elven doctor noted with relief that the swirling vortex of falling leaves was finally beginning to slow down. Turning back to his companion, he confirmed that enough mana pathways had been secured and urged her to go support the others, prompting a quick nod of assent before she took off. With the spread contained, he focused his concentration on the next phase, infusing opposing mana to neutralize the remaining corruptive miasma and restore the tree's internal circulation. The elven healer stared in complete disbelief, astonished that he could still channel such a massive surge of mana directly into the world tree after conjuring so many complex spell circles. She watched in utter disbelief as the staggering volume of magical power surged from him, far surpassing even her own reserves as the leader of the elves. By harnessing this momentum, he was distributing mana to every extremity of the world tree without imposing any strain on its delicate branches or foliage. As he stood resolute, his mind locked in fierce concentration, the elven matriarch was filled with profound admiration for the sheer strength and determination of the young man standing before her. Closing his eyes and pushing past his exhaustion, he felt the current of life force begin to flow steadily through the ancient bark, driving his energy forward until the final surge of magic took hold. Down below, the attendants looking up at the canopy suddenly paused in surprise as the cascade of falling, withered leaves abruptly ceased. Before their very eyes, fresh green buds began to sprout along the ancient boughs, signaling that the world tree's natural ability to heal and regenerate had been fully rekindled. In a matter of moments, a vibrant wave of lush green foliage erupted across the massive crown, restoring the colossal tree to its full, magnificent glory. Overwhelmed by the miracle, the elven ruler wept openly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pressed a hand to her face, sensing the genuine breath of life returning to her sacred homeland. Farther away on the battlefield, the sudden shift in atmosphere caught the warrior off guard, causing her to turn sharply as the dark corruption began to recede. Reinvigorated by the turning tide, she and her allies pressed their advantage, striking down the remaining corrupted entities with decisive blows. With the miasma rapidly thinning into harmless mist, the defenders caught their breath, confident that the immediate threat to the realm had finally passed. She raised her blade with renewed vigor as the group realized the falling leaves had finally stopped, signaling that the world tree's purification capabilities were returning to normal. Before them, the horde of invading beasts suddenly halted in their tracks, as if pulled back by an unseen force. Noticing the sudden change in rhythm, the swordswoman watched in astonishment as the monsters stood frozen, their aggressive momentum completely draining away. As the dark creatures began to turn and flee, the companions realized the restored purification pulse was weakening the miasma-fed beasts, confirming that their defensive effort had actually succeeded. Overjoyed by the realization, the entire party raised their weapons high into the air, celebrating their hard-fought victory and safeguarding the sanctuary. Amidst the quiet calm returning to the forest canopy, a call echoed upward toward the ancient elven guardian. Although the elven doctor offered her heartfelt gratitude for their rescue, the fallen hero merely smiled and announced that one final step remained to secure the tree permanently. Chanting an intricate incantation, he channeled his light mana into a glowing magical seal that slammed directly into the massive trunk. Concentric bands of glowing light runes wrapped around the immense spire of the world tree, binding powerful purification magic straight into its core structure. Looking up in awe at the monumental display, Ishua listened as Alan explained that these rings would serve as a reserve storehouse of light energy, ensuring the tree could automatically purify itself whenever evil forces overwhelmed it again. He stood in surprise as an affectionate call reached his ears, expressing immense gratitude for the lengths he had gone to protect them. Surrounding the hero, the atmosphere softened completely as Ishua and her companions offered gentle, relieved smiles after the fierce battle. Unable to contain her relief, Arya wrapped her arms tightly around him while asking if anyone was hurt, leaving Lillian to look on with a subtle touch of envy. Caught entirely off guard by the sudden embrace, he stammered in bewilderment, his mind struggling to keep pace with the flurry of affection. Just then, Methea and Little stepped forward with cheerful grins, joining the joyful cluster of allies. Methea threw herself into the embrace as well, voicing her amazement at their timely rescue, which instantly drew a pouting protest from Arya over sharing the embrace. As the group exchanged lively banter over secret titles and unexpected coincidences, Ishua stood gracefully at the center, radiating serene composure. Softening her expression, the elven physician offered her deepest thanks, praising him as a true savior descended upon the sanctuary before warmly acknowledging the rest of the group as well. Looking at the formidable array of companions gathered around him, he smiled brightly, declaring that together they formed an incredible party. Though they sheepishly pointed out that their meeting was merely a stroke of luck rather than an official alliance, Ishua warmly concluded that the entire realm had been saved and called for a feast in their honor. Her proclamation immediately transforms the village into a scene of boundless revelry, with elven villagers raising their mugs high and shouting in excitement. Massive barrels of special reserve sake are rolled out into the streets, while cooks prepare the finest ingredients from across the entire realm to honor their saviors. At the center of the feast, the heroic companions sit together, surrounded by joyful elven villagers dancing and celebrating their miraculous victory. Observing the serene smile on the elven leader's face, the young warrior reflects on the crushing burden she had carried alone as protector of the dying world tree, marveling at how surreal their triumph feels. Moved by her past struggles, he offers his heartfelt assistance for any future troubles, promising to lend his strength whenever she might need it, which touches her deeply. She gazes back at him with soft, earnest eyes, overwhelmed by his genuine selflessness and noble heart. A sudden blush hits him as he detects the intimate affection in her gaze, leaving him flustered in the middle of the lively party. However, the tender atmosphere is instantly shattered when the holy priestess bounds forward with overflowing mugs, declaring loudly that she will drink fruit wine until daybreak. Sweating nervously, he winces at the sudden chaos, realizing too late that he had lowered his guard. As the crowd cheers her on, the priestess enthusiastically chugs the dangerously potent brew straight from a mug, completely ignoring his desperate warnings about its high alcohol content. She boasted incoherently about how her divine status granted her total immunity to drunkenness, even as her flushed cheeks and slurred speech betrayed her complete intoxication while she clung tightly to her exasperated companion. Nearby, the young hero stared ahead with wide, tear-filled eyes, completely overwhelmed by the chaotic turn the evening had taken. Reduced to tears by the alcohol, Lillian openly lamented that her true feelings would never reach Ishua, while Arya drunkenly questioned who could have possibly allowed the hero to drink in the first place. Sinking into deep self-pity and declaring herself an unwanted, weak hero, Lillian snatched a bottle and began scrambling up a tall structure, leaving Alan shouting after her to leave the alcohol behind. Alan could only watch in stunned silence as the chaos escalated, while Mathia exchanged a knowing look with her fellow companion amidst the madness. Both women shared a serene, empathetic smile, recognizing the shared burden of managing their troublesome, emotional friends. Exchanging enthusiastic thumbs up, they silently acknowledged how difficult their respective positions were while the intoxicated duo continued their antics behind them. Underneath the glowing runic monuments of the elven village, the night sky echoed with drunken wails, exasperated scoldings, and desperate pleas until the late hours. By the following morning, twilight gave way to clear skies over the wooden palisade gates of the village. With their belongings packed onto a horse-drawn carriage, the travelers bade a formal farewell to Ishua and the elven hosts, ready to embark on the next leg of their journey. She listened as the captive raged behind iron bars, bellowing in protest at his imprisonment and stubbornly claiming to be the true hero. The villagers dismissed his wild demands, pointing out that no hero would ever try to destroy their home like the demon he was, while Alan silently stared at the caged creature. Joining in, the young swordswoman and her companion coldly suggested that a simple cage was far too generous, proposing they simply break his leg to prevent any escape, a threat that left the prisoner sputtering in disbelief. Despite having his mana drained, the captive remained defiant, but Alan recognized the persistent danger he posed, concluding that delivering a full report to the king was imperative. Outlining their upcoming route, the party decided to stop at Nabish first before making the final journey back to the royal capital. Warm farewells were exchanged with Ishua and the elven folk, who expressed their gratitude for the festive visit and welcomed them to return anytime. With a bright, fond smile, Alan turned back to his companions, ready to embark on the road ahead. Setting off under the open sky, the group urged their horse forward, departing the elven lands as they set their sights once again on Nob. Inside the bustling guildhall of the newcomers' town, Nobish, the receptionist turned abruptly in surprise as the entrance doors swung open, her attention immediately drawn to the arriving party. Stepping into the room, the entire group presented themselves together, with Alan taking the center beside Lillian, Mithia, Ishua, and Arya. The receptionist let out a breathless sigh of relief, overjoyed to see Ishua unharmed and deeply relieved that the companions had managed to reunite safely. Holding her official quest documents in hand, she stepped forward to assure the receptionist of their safety. She apologized profusely for any trouble caused by their extended absence and expressed her desire to immediately submit the formal report regarding their recent mission. Upon hearing this calm request, the receptionist shrieked in utter astonishment, her mind racing with disbelief. She began recounting how catastrophic conditions had become around the elven sanctuary, where the failing condition of the world tree had driven local beast life into a bloodthirsty fury. Continuing her frantic exclamations, she pointed out that not only had the party slain an extraordinary S-rank Ogre King subspecies threatening the realm, but they had astonishingly managed to fully restore the divine power of the world tree itself. Driven to total bewilderment by these legendary accomplishments, the woman leaned in sharply and demanded to know who Ishua truly was. Standing beside her, he could only offer a deadpan, sweat-dropped stare, quietly pondering the absurdity of being questioned so intensely after accomplishing their task. He casually insisted that he was merely an ordinary mana porter, leaving the women behind him trembling in absolute disbelief at his complete lack of self-awareness. In response, the flustered receptionist adamantly protested that 30 gold coins were far too modest for such a monumental feat, insisting on increasing their reward even as he stubbornly refused to accept anything extra. As she officially processed the paperwork, she couldn't help but marvel and shudder at the sheer humility of a man who achieved legendary results yet genuinely believed he had done nothing noteworthy. With the quest form stamped completed above the depiction of the restored world tree, the receptionist excitedly beckoned Lillian forward to discuss the official registry. Gazing at the stamped bounty poster of the defeated Ogre King, the receptionist gushed with emotion, declaring how she had always dreamed of seeing the rising hero Lillian and the supreme mage Ishua fight side by side. Her enthusiastic praise was suddenly interrupted by a harsh metallic clatter, as a furious voice shouted demanding to be released from a nearby iron cage. Turning toward the cell, the group observed the captive warrior locked behind thick iron bars, who dramatically proclaimed himself to be the true hero. Grasping the bars, the caged man angrily insisted that their accomplishments rightfully belonged to him as their leader, before accusing them of nearly starting a war with the elves and destroying the world tree. Hearing his frantic accusations, Alan dryly suggested it might have been wiser to leave him locked up, while Mithia openly glared at the prisoner, harboring a deep grudge for how he had abandoned her to die in an A-rank dungeon. Brushing off the prisoner's outburst with a sweat drop and a casual smile, Alan concluded that their next move was simply to set off toward the royal capital. He and his companions arrived at the royal palace, preparing to deliver a full report of the incident to the king. Seated upon his ornate throne, the king welcomed the party back, expecting a standard briefing on their recent mission. However, the monarch expressed deep confusion over reports received from Queen Chelsea's elven emissary, demanding to know why the hero had acted alone and worsened the situation, leaving the disgraced swordsman struggling for words. Stepping forward, Lillian clarified the situation by revealing that Alan had banished Ishua from the party, which caused her, Arya, and Mithia to lose all trust in his leadership and depart as well. Furious at this revelation, the king loudly berated Alan for his foolishness, reminding him that his unique holy sword skill was worthless without Ishua's vital mana support and strategic wisdom. Mithia and Lillian continued their damning account, explaining how Alan had lied about Ishua's voluntary departure, coerced them into a dangerous A-rank dungeon, and even attempted to sacrifice Mithia to save himself when cornered. Absorbing the grave testimony, the sovereign pieced together the truth, realizing the hero had fabricated his story about investigating the world tree alone. With his anger boiling over, the king sternly confronted the fallen hero, demanding confirmation of whether he had dared to lie directly to the crown. As the royal advisors nodded in silent agreement that the matter was resolved, the disgraced leader slumped silently, unable to offer any further excuses. Standing before the silent throne room, the king issued his final decree, officially stripping Alan of his title and privileges as a hero. He scrambled to grasp at straws, frantically begging Ishua to return to his party and pleading that he could still turn everything around. Desperate to salvage his position, he turned to the rest of the companions, reaching out a hand as he begged them all to simply start over from the beginning. The companions only stared back at him with sheer exasperation, questioning what could possibly be the point of such a request after everything that had transpired. Saint Arya stepped forward with an unervingly bright smile, surrounded by a heavy, dark aura as she cheerfully assured him that if he were truly worthy of heroics, he would have no trouble rising through the ranks of adventurers all over again. Struck by her chilling response, sweat poured down his brow as he stuttered in disbelief, unable to process the idea of restarting his career from nothing. Before he could argue further, the king's booming voice resounded throughout the hall, listing his severe transgressions, instigating a diplomatic crisis with the elves, attempting to flee his duties, and presenting false reports to the crown. Looming high upon his throne, the monarch pronounced the ultimate judgment, declaring that the fallen hero would be permanently branded with the mark of a criminal for the rest of his life. Horrified by the severity of the decree, his eyes widened in terror as he shouted out in protest against being labeled a common convict. Heavy armed guards immediately closed in on him, seizing his shoulders as he thrashed helplessly, crying out that the sentence was utterly absurd. Surrounded and pinned by the guards' spears and grips, his frantic screams echoed uselessly through the throne room as he was forcefully taken into custody. With the disgraced hero dragged away, the king turns his full attention to the elven adventurer standing before the throne, calling out to address her directly. The monarch praises her exceptional handling of the recent crisis and offers to grant any wish she desires, but she humbly declines, explaining that she has already received her reward from the guild and feels unworthy of such lavish royal praise. Hearing this, an advisor beside the throne proposes bestowing a noble domain and title upon her, a grand idea the king instantly approves of, leaving the elven maiden in complete disbelief at the thought of becoming an aristocrat. Her companions gasp in astonishment at the extraordinary offer, reminding her that commoners rarely receive such high honors and enthusiastically urging her to accept the royal favor. Overwhelmed by the collective clamor and the sudden weight of the proposal, she can only look around at her excited party members in bewildered shock. Composing herself with a soft smile, she firmly declines the noble status, explaining that while she is deeply honored, her true heart belongs to the open road and striving for greater accomplishments as an adventurer. Looking around at her loyal friends, she warmly adds that the time spent journeying alongside them has been the happiest period of her life. Moved by her genuine devotion to her companions and her craft, the monarch closes his eyes with a nod of profound respect, accepting her decision. He offers his final royal blessing, wishing the brave party the utmost success in all their future endeavors. With their royal audience at an end, the adventuring party strides out of the majestic hall together, ready to embrace the boundless horizon ahead. She turned her gaze toward Lillian, asking what her next steps would be and if she wished for them to travel as a pair once more. Prompted by Arya, who urged her to seize this opportunity, Lillian realized this was her golden chance to officially form a party with Ishua, despite how chaotic their rescue attempt had been. Hesitating for a brief moment under the weight of her choice, she gathered her courage and stammered out a timid response. Overcome with earnest desire, she bowed dramatically before Ishua, pleading passionately for both herself and Alan to be included in the elf's party. She pumped herself up with fiery enthusiasm, completely determined to make her plea heard. Alan expressed surprise at her request, noting how highly sought after both Lillian and her companion were, but Lillian insisted, praising Ishua's incredible strength and warm manner, confident they were destined to leave their mark on history. Ishua modestly brushed off the high praise as an exaggeration, yet warmly welcomed the idea, expressing that she would be genuinely delighted to have both of them join her journey. As a brief silence settled over the companions, someone shifted nervously nearby, clearing her throat to prepare to speak. Blushing furiously, Arya summoned all her resolve and timidly voiced her own wish, begging to be allowed to join their party as well. The companions stood in stunned silence, looking back at her as the party's unexpected new dynamic began to take shape. She had spoken so timidly that Lillian could not help but tease her, remarking that her request sounded like a little girl asking to play house. Hearing this exchange, Alan interjected with wide-eyed surprise, recalling the legendary tales surrounding the hero. He brought up how she had single-handedly slain Ifrit, one of the Demon Kings for Supreme Commanders, arguing that someone of her stature could freely choose any elite warrior she desired. In response, Ishua remained completely composed, listening quietly as the group discussed their experiences together back at the elf village. She countered Alan's argument by pointing out how incredibly difficult it was to gather such capable and trustworthy companions in the first place. With a calm smile, the elf went on to praise Lillian's extraordinary character and skill, playfully adding a subtle jab that she was far superior to Alan. Because of those reassuring words, the other women nodded in harmonious agreement, happily accepting the arrangement. Seeing their unified response, Alan closed his eyes briefly in acceptance before realizing the matter appeared fully settled. Taking the initiative, he turned toward Lillian and formally announced that all four of them would be joining her party, assuming a hero ought to lead the group. Immediately, Arya burst into a frantic scream of protest, shouting that he had it completely backward and declaring that she specifically wanted to join Ishua's party instead. Completely bewildered by her intense outburst, Alan argued that having a hero as leader was standard practice, while she flailed in utter panic, frantically seeking counsel from her stuffed doll. He suggested that if Ishua felt strongly about it, they should simply follow her lead, catching the others completely off guard. With a broad, confident smile, he declared that the team dynamic was settled. The newly aligned party united key figures, including the magic swordsman Mathia, Saintess Arya, and mana porter Ishua. Alongside hero Lillian, sword Saint Diana, and Sage Little, the formidable unit stood complete. Cheering together, the members celebrated the official formation of a new hero party. Meanwhile, high within the sinister Demon King castle, bickering erupted among the four heavenly kings as Undine mocked Afrida for being beaten to a pulp by a hero. Defending their tactical approach, Sylphie argued that corrupting the world tree with miasma to cripple the elven village was a sound plan. Quietly observing from the side, Gnome pondered how a simple little hero could have possessed enough power to defeat Afrida. Their discussion turned toward Ishua's unbelievable feats, walking through miasma unharmed and purifying the entire world tree effortless like a cheat. Listening closely to the report, the Demon King frowned with intense scrutiny, questioning if such overwhelming magic could truly be possible for a mortal human. He listened intently as his generals reported on the monstrous mana reserves and extraordinary control displayed by Ishua, concluding that this was precisely why hero Lillian had chosen to team up with the Elven Doctor. Processing this news, the demon commanders agreed that subtle tricks would no longer suffice, insisting that they overwhelm the enemy with brute force. Amidst the calls for an all-out assault, the generals paused and turned to their ruler, noticing his quiet contemplation. The Dark Lord reasoned that even in a head-on clash, they could not afford to waste their power against the hero's party, proposing instead to turn a fellow human hero against them. Her eyes gleaming with dark realization, one of his commanders caught on to the scheme, contemplating the value of a human hero willing to cooperate with their forces. A sinister silence descended upon the throne room as their strategy took shape, targeting a bitter outcast among the humans. Far from the demon realm, the disgraced former hero cursed his miserable fate, barred from accepting worthwhile quests because of the brand sealing his standing. Gritting his teeth in fury, he directed all his festering hatred toward Ishua, blaming the Elven Doctor for his complete ruin. Back in the Dark Fortress, the Demon King wore a predatory grin as he unveiled the core of his plan, dragging that very fallen hero to the wooden wheel of a heavy carriage rumbled continuously, clattering against the rough stone of the open road as the party made their journey. Inside the wooden cab, He listened quietly as the conversation turned toward their elven companion, watching her respond with composure while holding his open book. Having arrived in the immediate territory, the group discussed how they should address one another now that they were traveling together as a unified party, with Lillian begrudgingly admitting she had forgotten their agreement to drop formal titles. As they prepared to swap positions inside the carriage, he smiled warmly while suggesting it was time to change spots, though Ishiwa politely maintained her respectful tone toward them. Turning to her companions, the elven doctor inquired whether they had previously encountered the lord who ruled over the immediate domain during their past travels. Reminiscing about their journey following their banishment by Alan, she recalled helping a carriage transport the precious white dew elixir on their path toward Nabish. She listened intently as the elf recounted their previous journey to escort the afflicted to the lord's estate. As the elf explained how an unknown illness had originally stricken only the lord's daughter and a few servants, the warrior realized the current demand signaled a far graver crisis, urging everyone to hurry. Moments later, as their carriage drew near the grand estate, a voice called out in recognition, confirming that the lord's mansion was finally in sight. Exchanging a quiet look of mutual understanding, the companions prepared themselves for the meeting ahead. Upon their arrival, the lord of the territory warmly welcomed them by name, standing beside his fully recovered daughter. Expressing surprise at their swift return, he noted how quickly they had gathered the necessary supplies, while the party expressed relief at seeing his daughter in good health. However, the atmosphere shifted back to solemnity as they discussed the alarming scale of the white dew elixir needed this time. The Lord revealed that the strange affliction had now spread across the entire territory, frustrating local doctors and leaving the high-tier potion as their only effective remedy against fatal symptoms. He explained that requests for collecting Renjetsu herbs had surged, yet warned that merely administering medicine had its limits as they scrambled to gather ingredients from neighboring areas. Hearing these troubling developments, the young adventurer turned with a sudden expression of alarm and concern. He listened intently as the heroic twin-tailed girl stepped forward, her voice ringing with firm resolve as she requested permission to investigate the strange disease troubling the people. Although their original delivery quest was technically fulfilled upon reaching the mansion, the party found themselves offering apologies to Ishiwa for taking the initiative to press further into the mystery. Alan admitted that while he had not anticipated carrying out personal investigations, distributing the white dew elixir across the scattered villages would provide the perfect opportunity to uncover the root cause. With a warm, reassuring smile, he voiced his absolute confidence in Lillian's heroic instincts, prompting Ishiwa to gently agree that a true hero's duty extends far beyond merely fulfilling contractual obligations. Softened by their unwavering trust, Lillian's eyes widened with quiet gratitude as she took in the elven doctor's supportive words. Turning back to the young heroine, Ishiwa inquired what specific detail had piqued her suspicion in the first place, while Mathia and Alan engaged in lighthearted bickering in the background over proper honorifics. This brought back the vivid memory of a defeated monster who, amidst its arrogant boasting, had blurted out alarming details regarding a sinister plot orchestrated by Undine. Before hastily fleeing the scene, the foolish creature had accidentally revealed their scheme to weaken the world tree and send a horde of beasts to assault the elven village. Hearing the recounting of this incident, Ishiwa pondered whether the current outbreak could be linked to that covert strategy, even as Lillian privately noted that the enemy seemed blissfully unaware their plot had already been thwarted. With their resolve renewed, the heavy wooden wheels of the carriage ground into motion once more, carrying the party onward across the dusty countryside toward the afflicted villages. Upon reaching their first destination, the harvest village, the group immediately prepared to unload their supplies. Watching them work, the local driver couldn't help but comment on how unusual the party's motives seemed. Analyzing the situation further, Alan pieced together the underlying scheme. By repeatedly issuing delivery quests for the white dew elixir without solving the root cause, someone was continuously driving up demand and rewards until taking the quest became unavoidable. As Saint Arya stepped forward ahead of the others, eager to help, he quietly observed her genuine altruism, admitting to himself that her kindness far surpassed his own. Shifting his focus back to the task at hand, His expression hardened with renewed resolve. Guided by a village official, they were led toward a cluster of makeshift huts, with the man explaining that the overwhelming surge of victims had forced them to construct emergency shelters at a pace they could barely maintain. Inside, rows of stricken villagers lay incapacitated beneath heavy blankets, their pale faces reflecting the silent severity of the unknown affliction. Witnessing the grim reality firsthand, the companions stood frozen in shock at the sheer scale of suffering before them. The temporary hall stretched out before them, crammed with endless rows of cots holding helpless patients. The official went on to explain that over 100 people were afflicted across several similar huts. With the true cause still a mystery, their only recourse was to continuously apply healing magic and pray for the victims' bodies to recover. He listened attentively as the village doctor explained that while the white dew elixir brought temporary relief, their supply was nowhere near sufficient for every patient. Eager to follow Lillian's inspiring example and contribute however he could, the young adventurer stepped forward, asking for permission to examine the sick child himself. Receiving a hesitant nod, he introduced himself and Ishiwa to the boy's mother. The mother's eyes widened in disbelief upon realizing she was standing before the hero who had vanquished one of the 4 heavenly kings, along with the legendary mana porter who had saved the world tree. Gentle and focused, he placed his hand upon the young boy's feverish forehead. Though medical diagnosis lay beyond his usual realm of expertise, he was determined to uncover whether this mysterious affliction was part of a sinister plot orchestrated by the Demon King. As his perceptions surged through the child's body, a sudden shock registered across his face. He blurted out in astonishment that the boy's internal mana balance was completely distorted, causing the bewildered doctor to gasp in disbelief at his sudden revelation. Turning to the doctor, he elaborated on his findings, noting specifically that the boy possessed an unnaturally depleted reserve of dark mana. In nature, every living being relies on a harmonious balance of mana encompassing all elemental attributes, even if natural individual traits cause slight variations from person to person. Reasoning that correcting this internal disruption would restore the patient's health, he proposed adjusting the boy's elemental balance directly. The doctor stood paralyzed in disbelief, struggling to comprehend how anyone could diagnose something so complex with merely a soft touch. Without hesitation, the young swordsman focused his own energy, channeling a precise stream of mana straight into the child's forehead. In an instant, the child's pale skin regained its healthy color, and he sat up with vibrant energy. Watching the overjoyed mother embrace her fully recovered son, the adventurer smiled warmly, reassuring them that the boy would make a swift and complete recovery. Observing the miraculous cure, the doctor finally understood the true nature of the illness. The famed white dew elixir had not truly cured the disease, but merely alleviated the symptoms by temporarily balancing the body's mana. He confirmed that all the sick children in the clinic shared the exact same symptoms after demonstrating his ability to balance their mana. Surprised by his incredible precision, the attending doctor looked on in utter shock, while Arya stepped forward, offering to cast wide-area healing magic to soothe the remaining patient's pain. Seeing the priestess prepare such an ambitious spell, the village doctor gasped at the overwhelming talent assembled within the party. Meanwhile, Mithia offered to assist in brewing more white dew elixir to ensure they had every possible remedy ready. Hearing that the affliction involved a depletion of dark mana rather than a simple plague, Lillian listened intently, her eyes narrowing with sudden resolve. Without losing a moment, she declared that she would question the locals directly, while Mithia zipped into the air to scan the surrounding village for unusual mana signatures. Watching his companions leap into action without hesitation, Alan felt a surge of pride in their swift initiative and unwavering commitment to helping others. Inspired by their determination, he resolved to match their efforts and tackle his own part of the task with equal vigor. Outside the clinic, frantic commotion filled the streets as villagers rushed back and forth, desperate to prepare supplies for the mounting list of casualties. Stepping back out into the open, the dark-haired warrior joined the elven healer and Arya to ask the anxious locals about the situation, only to be met with worried faces and hesitant murmurs. To their utter astonishment, the bedridden patients had all risen from their cots, gathering together on their feet despite previous instructions to remain resting. Ishua stared in disbelief at the miraculous recovery, realizing that Arya had managed to sustain wide-area healing magic across the entire building without depleting her own reserves. Her miraculous display sent shockwaves of joy throughout the plaza, leading the villagers to raise their arms and weep in disbelief at their sudden recovery. Overcome with gratitude, the townsfolk declared that they were witnessing history, extolling Ishua as the savior who had protected both the world tree and their beloved home. Flustered by their grand declarations, Alan raised his hands in a frantic attempt to lessen their praise, insisting that saving the world tree had been a group effort rather than his accomplishment alone. Before he could quiet the crowd, Lillian descended from above to join Ishua and Alan, prompting him to instantly ask if she had uncovered any information during her search. Fixing them with a sharp, resolute gaze, she announced that she had indeed discovered a critical piece of evidence regarding their investigation. Her words only fueled the villagers' excitement further, sending chants echoing through the crowd as they hailed Ishua and Lillian as an unbeatable pair. Sweating nervously as the crowd shouted their names, Alan tried once more to direct credit where it belonged, pointing out that Lillian was their true leader while acknowledging everyone else's contributions. To his utter disbelief, even his fellow companions joined in on the chanting, waving their arms enthusiastically and adding to the wild fervor of the crowd. A loud command suddenly cut through the deafening noise, calling for everyone present to settle down and regain their composure. As silence swept over the plaza, a shadowed figure stepped forward at the village entrance, drawing all attention toward the unexpected interruption. A sinister man with dark facial markings smirked as he addressed a newcomer, assigning him his very first task, targeting Harvest Village. Gesturing toward crates loaded onto a wagon, the man ordered him to sell suspicious remedies in the disease-stricken settlement. Inspecting the cargo, Alan recognized the truth with growing dread. These were fake panaceas with severe side effects, prompting him to demand why he was being forced into such a scheme. In response, his antagonist burst into mocking laughter, telling him that it was time to accept his harsh new reality. Looming over him, the criminal leader reminded Alan that since he was now branded an outcast, he had no choice left but to live as a few days after losing his heroic status, the former party leader found himself in the novice town of Nabish, causing a commotion inside the local adventurers guild as he angrily insisted on his standing. Standing before the counter, he angrily argued with the receptionist, insisting that despite his current situation, he should still be allowed to accept at least E-rank quests. The clerk remained firm, delivering a blunt shock when she clarified that individuals with criminal records were restricted strictly to leftover assignments. Storming out into the woods, the disgraced swordsman cursed in frustration, blaming Ishua entirely for the indelible mark that prevented him from securing proper work. Sitting dejectedly against a tree as his stomach rumbled, he pondered how he would afford food or lodging, only for a mysterious masked figure to suddenly approach and greet him. Glaring upward in suspicion, he demanded to know the stranger's identity, only to be addressed directly as a hero by the masked intruder. He stared warily at the shady figures who approached him with an offering of work, immediately suspecting they belonged to the infamous criminal guild. Outraged, the former hero spat back at them, refusing to stoop so low as to align himself with outlaws, but the group remained unfazed. In response, they unveiled a lavish spread of food, causing his empty stomach to growl loudly in betrayal of his pride. Tempted by the feast, he wavered, demanding to hear the details of their offer before committing. Moments later, his hunger completely overwhelmed his dignity as he devoured the meal with desperate ferocity. Having reluctantly accepted the job as a guard for their wagon caravan, he snapped at a guild member who complained about his eating on duty. As the caravan rolled onward, he brooded over his fallen status, telling himself this arrangement was merely a temporary fix until he could figure out his next move. Seeking clarification, he asked about the nature of their cargo and was told they were transporting medicine to an afflicted region. The reality, however, was far darker. The shipment consisted of Phoenix pills, a dangerous drug that granted temporary healing at the cost of severe mental deterioration. Appalled by the revelation that he was escorting contraband, he angrily refused to take part in such a crime and insisted on leaving at once. He was immediately confronted by the criminal leader, who sneered and asked if he truly believed he could simply walk away after eating their food and learning their plan. The bandits laughed mockingly, boasting that by the time the drug's severe side effects kicked in, they would already be in the next town, treated as saviors by naive villagers. As the men loaded the heavy crates onto the wagons, the warrior watched them in silent disgust, wrestling with the realization of how low he had fallen. Soon after, they arrived at Harvest Village for their first assignment, where the crew boss casually barked orders to begin the operation. Masking his face to hide his identity, the former hero stepped forward and announced to the villagers that they had brought newly developed medicine from the royal capital for the sick. Internally, he doubted anyone would fall for such a suspicious pitch, but to his utter disbelief, the local elder's eyes welled with tears of gratitude. Overwhelmed by the news, the emotional old man begged them to accept the village's warmest hospitality for bringing relief to their remote countryside. The young fighter stood utterly speechless, astonished by how easily the gullible elder had swallowed their deception. Continuing into the settlement, his gaze was drawn toward a large crowd gathered in the distance, prompting him to wonder what was happening. A knot of anxiety formed in his stomach as the elder mentioned that another group of heroes had visited their village just a short while ago. He watched in silent dismay as the village crowd gathered, their spirits buoyed by the arrival of the renowned figures. Realizing this situation was taking a turn for the worse. Standing in the center of the square was Alan, instantly recognizable as the heroic figure drawing everyone's admiration wherever he went. Once again, in a town just like this, the charismatic warrior found himself fawned over by the locals, completely overshadowing everything around him. Women flocked to his side as if it were the most natural thing in the world, captivated by his heroic aura and easy charm. Looking at his confident stance, anyone could see he was a true hero destined to go down in history. Refusing to let his rival claim total victory, the masked captive clenched his fist around the bottle of contraband elixir, frustration boiling inside him. He thrust the medicine bottle high into the air, bellowing at the top of his lungs that a genuine cure-all drug was available right here. Alan turned in shock at the sudden outburst, while the masked seller declared that this remedy was far cheaper than the costly white dew elixir, urging the crowd not to rely on expensive alternatives. Whispers quickly swept through the onlookers as they recognized Mathia among the party, identifying her as a legendary sage. The realization struck him with bitter frustration. Competing against a party that included a highly knowledgeable sage on medicines would make his task exponentially harder. He felt the icy grip of finality settling in as the hero's party exposed his dealings with the Phoenix Pill, a hazardous narcotic known for causing severe mental instability and carrying a heavy criminal sentence just for its possession. Driven to desperation by their accusations, the former hero seized a young child as a hostage, pressing his blade close while blaming his ruin entirely on the mana porter. He threatened the party to stand back, demanding to know if they truly cared for the captive's life. Before he could leverage his hostage further, glowing magical runes and intricate circles suddenly erupted across the ground beneath his feet, enveloping the space in a realm known as Fantasy World. Looking upward in utter disbelief, the rogue warrior watched as the small spellcaster hovered far above the ground, while Alan and his allies stood unimpeded and fully prepared below. The young mage announced that she had isolated them within a unique dimension of her own creation, leaving him searching frantically for the child he had just been holding. Reunited and resolute, the heroic party informed him that his cruel ploy was useless, as the custom domain rendered all hostage attempts completely impossible. Raising his hands in a frantic panic, he pleaded with them to halt and listen, desperate to negotiate his way out of the inescapable trap. His frantic pleas withered instantly when he met their gazes, recognizing the same cold, unyielding judgment in their eyes that had haunted his past failures. As Lillian firmly declared that they would never assist anyone tied to the criminal guild, he recoiled from their merciless stares, struggling to comprehend their absolute lack of sympathy. Unable to endure their scathing silence, the disgraced swordsman dropped to his knees and begged for one final chance, promising to climb the ranks the right way if only they would grant him mercy. He gnashed his teeth in sheer rage, screaming curses as desperation took hold of his mind. Summoning his holy sword in a last-ditch effort to turn the tide, he prepared to strike, forcing the mage to react instantly to the mounting threat. Instantly, the mage clapped his hands together, chanting the spell mana field to engulf the surrounding area in high-density magical energy. A massive spherical domain manifested, completely isolating the fallen warrior from the rest of the party within a realm of concentrated mana. Confusion washed over the swordsman as dark veins bulged across his face, bewildered by the sudden environmental shift as his opponent watched him dispassionately. Staggering under the pressure, he choked out a protest, to which the mage calmly explained that while the field normally accelerated mana recovery, unaccustomed bodies suffered severe magic sickness. The fallen hero complained that the spell made him nauseous, prompting a stern reminder from his opponent, who noted that repeated warnings to build up mana tolerance had been foolishly ignored. With cold detachment, the mage delivered his final judgment, stating that if everyone else could withstand this intensity, his suffering was merely proof of his own lack of discipline. Pushing the spell beyond its limits, the caster offered a brief apology before unleashing mana overload, causing the defeated warrior to scream in agony as the rampant magic surged through his system. Reaching out weakly while clutching his sword, he collapsed to his knees, his consciousness slipping away under the overwhelming brunt of the magic. Stripped of his mana, the captive former hero was no longer able to invoke the power of the holy sword. The vigilante squad leader assured the party that his men would safely transport the prisoner to the royal capital, allowing the group to focus on investigating the surrounding territory. As the horse cart rattled away with the prisoner, Lillian wondered aloud whether someone caught selling illegal drugs while bearing a criminal mark would face exile or execution. Sensing her distress, Matthias softly reassured her that none of this was her fault. Turning their attention back to the immediate crisis, Ishua asked Lillian if she had discovered any clues regarding the strange disease plaguing the region, to which Lillian eagerly confirmed she had. Leading the way through the village, Lillian explained that the source was cleverly hidden with magic, but remained confident that it had to be concealed somewhere nearby. A moment later, she uncovered a glowing arcane seal hidden beneath a stone lid, identifying it as a sinister magic circle designed to transfer dark mana. Examining the discovery together, the companions realized that several similar arrays had been secretly installed across high-traffic areas, including the town well, prompting an urgent call for everyone to stand back. The unsettling realization left Lillian visibly shaken, confirming her worst fears about the deep-seated corruption affecting the region. Above the seemingly peaceful roofs of the settlement, a quiet stillness veiled the growing danger beneath. Farther down the path, the guard cart continued its steady journey toward the capital, transporting the helpless captive. Hidden in the shadows along the route, a group of sinister schemers watched the transport pass, mocking the former hero for his easy capture while discussing their failed arrangement with him. In the shadows of the forest, the veiled figure turned her gaze toward the coarse mercenaries who had assisted in her scheme, addressing them with a chill in her voice. Unfazed by her icy demeanor, the two men stepped forward, eagerly demanding the payment they had been promised for their dirty work, to which she calmly agreed. As they crudely scoffed about the terms of their agreement, deadly sharp strands erupted without warning, impaling both mercenaries through their torsos before they could even draw a breath. Leaving their lifeless bodies collapsing into the dirt, she coldly declared that the only reward awaiting traitors like them was the sweet embrace of death. Turning her attention toward the fallen hero, Alan, a dark magical aura swirled around his bound form in the clearing. She wore a cruel, triumphant smirk as she taunted him, pointing out how far he had fallen and asking if he was finally ready to turn his back on humanity once. Arriving at their destination, the companions gathered at the threshold, confident that they had finally located the origin of the mysterious ailment afflicting the immediate territory. Before them yawned the dark, cavernous entrance to the white-scaled dragon's lair, the resting place of a legendary calamity. Their investigation had truly begun a week earlier in Harvest Village, where they discovered 8 distinct magical circles siphoning dark mana, with likely many more hidden across nearby towns. These subtle arrays specifically targeted individuals with meager magical reserves to avoid detection, raising suspicions of the Demon King's influence. Worse still, the linked nature of the circles meant disarming them required a perfectly synchronized effort to prevent a dangerous backlash. Faced with the staggering effort required to purge every magic circle individually throughout the entire region, the party recognized that such an undertaking would demand substantial reinforcements. Deducing the nature of the network, the young warrior posited that a central core must exist to channel and manage all the harvested energy, prompting his companions to turn their thoughts toward finding this master controller. He listened intently as Mathia explained that destroying the focal point would force all the gathered energy to concentrate into a single location. In response, he proposed a daring plan to alter a section of the magic circle with a tracking spell, allowing them to trace the flow of mana directly to its source. Hearing this, the rest of the party gasped in disbelief, warning him that tampering with an active, linked magic circle was the domain of high-level magitechnicians and dangerously risky. Undeterred by their warnings, he meticulously outlined the complex process of rewriting the synchronization runes to deceive the network without severing the connection. Despite his thorough explanation, Lillian and Arya simply beamed with bright smiles, cheerfully admitting that they had not understood a single word. Stepping forward with resolve, he pressed his palm against the glowing formation, allowing it to begin drawing upon his own mana reservoir. Maintaining intense focus, he carefully regulated the extraction to ensure the small flow would not trigger a sudden flare or alarm within the main system. As the altered spell took hold, a vast magical pulse expanded through the surrounding area, linking their location directly to the distant energy web. High above the land, the invisible conduits flared to life, showing stream after stream of stolen mana circulating across multiple towns and steadily converging on a central hub. Looking out toward the distant horizon where the immense power gathered, he stood in awe at the staggering quantity of mana being funneled into one place. As he tracked the flow of stolen energy, the magical signal revealed its ultimate destination, a remote, snow-capped mountain range where a lone peak stood against the horizon. A sudden shock washed over his face as he recognized the exact coordinates of the convergence point. Demanding immediate verification, he ordered a physical map to be unrolled so he could mark the precise spot where the ley lines intersected. The chart confirmed his fears, pinpointing a massive cavern hidden deep at the base of the formidable mountain. Upon hearing the location, his companions paled with terror, instantly recognizing the infamous site. Whispers of disbelief rippled through the group as they repeated the name of the dreaded white-scaled dragon's cavern. Tension mounted as they voiced the true danger. This was no ordinary lair, but the resting place where the legendary disaster dragon slept. Despite the grim realization, the party assembled together, resolving to head directly to the mountain. Arriving at the gaping subterranean entrance, they observed that the massive volume of stolen mana was cleverly concealed, rendered completely undetectable without specialized detection spells. As she cast her detection magic across the threshold, she gasped at the overwhelming array of traps, warning everyone that an unsuspecting party would be wiped out before even stepping inside. She reflected on the ancient fairy tales surrounding the legendary disaster dragon, a catastrophic beast said to have laid waste to entire kingdoms while heroes of old struggled in vain to seal it away. The cavern had originally been classified as a formidable A-rank dungeon, but everything shifted when the first party to reach its deepest chamber discovered the terrifying monster slumbering within. Recognizing the extreme danger, authorities immediately revoked the cavern's designation as a conquerable dungeon and ordered its entrance sealed beneath massive stone blocks. Upon arriving at the site, they discovered that the massive boulder sealing the threshold had been cleared away, confirming confidential state intelligence made accessible through hero clearance. Piecing the clues together, the companions deduced that someone was intentionally directing vast amounts of dark mana toward the sleeping dragon's lair. With a grim smirk, Alan stated the terrifying truth that hung over them. The culprit intended to awaken the disaster dragon. They considered sending word to the king, but realized mobilizing royal troops would take far too long. If the dragon woke before help arrived, total devastation would follow. United in their resolve, the party decided to push directly into the innermost depths of the cavern to stop the ritual before the beast could stir. As they crossed into the dark subterranean passageway, anxiety began to creep in over facing an A-rank environment that exceeded their past combat experience. Haunted by memories of their previous close call, the group advanced cautiously into the rocky shadows, ready for any ambush. As she and her companions advanced into the depths, a swarm of chitinous, insectoid beasts emerged from the gloom to block their path. Driven by past grievances, Lillian charged forward with her sword drawn, determined to claim vengeance against the creatures. With a powerful swift strike, she cut through the monstrous front lines, protecting Mythia as they pressed through the cavern. Alongside her, Ishua executed a sweeping circular arc with her blade, instantly cleaving through the remaining fiends in a display of martial elegance. Watching the swift battle, Alan was stunned, amazed that the Vanguard could effortlessly clear an A-rank dungeon without relying on mana from the support team. With the monsters vanquished, the party regrouped and pushed deeper, though Mythia paused upon sensing an unusual shift in the surrounding atmosphere. Ahead of them, the mana stream split into two separate corridors, creating a confusing labyrinth likely designed as a trap for unsuspecting intruders. Stepping into the spotlight with absolute confidence, Arya cheerfully volunteered to navigate their route. Activating her mapping spell, she projected a luminous diagram of the cavern's winding layout into the air. Examining the magical map closely, she highlighted strange energy signatures along certain branches and directed everyone toward the safer right path. She cheered enthusiastically, snatching a bottle directly from the spatial map, as if playing an exciting game of treasure hunt. Watching her retrieve a mana potion so effortlessly, the hero stood bewildered by how her magic allowed her to instantly map an entire dungeon and gather loot from afar. The party recalled how grueling their previous A-rank dungeon crawl had been, realizing just how much her incredible abilities changed the dynamic of their adventure. Standing together at the front of the expedition, he proudly declared that with a formidable team like theirs, conquering this place would be an absolute breeze. Before long, the companions arrived at a set of towering, iron-studded double doors marking the threshold to the dungeon's innermost sanctum. As the ancient doors creaked open with a heavy groan, they readied their weapons, pondering what foul creature might be waiting beyond. Silhouetted against the bright light of the doorway, the adventurers cautiously stepped forward into the uncharted darkness ahead. Almost immediately, a repulsive stench filled the air, forcing the swordswoman to cover her nose in disgust as she likened the smell to rotting meat. Emerging into a colossal underground chamber, they gasped upon discovering hooded cultists gathered in ritual formation beneath an ominous altar setup. Looking up in utter horror, the young hero recognized the colossal, rotting dragon head embedded in the cavern wall, stunned by its grotesque scale. He stood alongside his companions as the hooded figures below finally noticed their presence, gasping in shock at the realization that the intruders were human rather than demons. Recognizing the young swordswoman at the forefront, the cultist leader furiously pointed her out as the hero who had defeated Afrida, prompting Lillian to boldly declare her name and mission to investigate the plague. She directly accused the fanatical cultists of belonging to the notorious Chaos Divine Guide Society, demanding answers from their masked ranks. While she warned the group about the cult's twisted belief that human salvation comes only through death, Alan questioned the sanity of a religion devoted entirely to worshipping the Demon King. Unfazed by the accusation, the cultist leader passionately proclaimed their intent to revive the colossal disaster dragon solely to earn the Demon King's favor and recognition. Appalled that such devastation was being unleashed for such a selfish desire, the party braced themselves as the cultists charged forward with fanatic shouts. Reminding her allies that their attackers were still human despite their heretical madness, Lillian strictly commanded everyone to subdue and capture the cultists without inflicting lethal force. The cultist leader sneered, foolishly boasting of their own strength and claiming they had conquered this dungeon as seasoned warriors who would not fall easily. Before his sentence could even be finished, the party moved like a flash, effortlessly overwhelming and subduing the entire cultist squad in a matter of heartbeats. Left utterly dumbfounded and tightly bound in ropes on the cold cavern floor, the cultist leader could only stare in disbelief at the heroes standing casually over them. Her swift and effortless subdual of his followers left the cult representative shaking in utter disbelief, unable to process how easily their defenses had collapsed. Refusing to accept defeat, he lunged toward the central control console, ignoring shouts warning him that attempting an incomplete awakening would mean disaster, insisting that as branch leader, he could not allow failure. Driven into a state of wild delirium, his face twisted into a maniacal grin as he proclaimed that death was true salvation, offering up his very life essence to serve the Demon King. Plunging his hand onto the activation circle, he funneled his remaining energy into the spell array, screaming a frantic incantation to force the dormant giant back to life. In response to his sacrilegious spell, an overwhelming wave of dark magic flooded the cavern, causing the pressure gauges to spike violently as the surrounding machinery trembled. Alerted by the sudden spike in malevolent energy, the party turned back in alarm, watching in disbelief as the subterranean chamber shook around them. As the fanatics' feverish chants echoed continuously through the vault, the massive, stone-like hide resting in the dark depths began to crack open. Slowly tearing through its ancient slumber, a massive, slit-pupiled eye snapped open, radiating unadulterated malice. A catastrophic beam of black energy erupted straight through the cavern's ceiling, piercing the mountain peak and shooting high into the sudden tremors, and an appalling sight caused him to recoil in disbelief, his jaw dropping as he struggled to comprehend the violent spectacle unfolding right before him. Beside him, she gasped in sudden terror, crying out as the massive cavern structure began crumbling into a giant plume of smoke and debris. As the destruction widened, she recalled ancient lore of a fabled beast said to have laid waste to entire realms, an entity so devastating that classifying it merely as an S-rank threat was utterly meaningless. She stood frozen alongside her companions as the colossal entity unveiled itself, the dreaded Calamity Dragon looming over them in terrifying grandeur. Surviving the initial destruction, the party exchanged frantic glances, questioning how a single breath attack could obliterate the cavern and the mountain alike, while praying everyone had escaped unharmed. Before they could catch their breath, a horrific squelching sound echoed as another massive appendage burst forth from the beast, raising immediate panic that another threat was emerging. The giant limbs slammed heavily into the earth, sending violent tremors through the ground right before the defensive line of adventurers. Amidst the swirling dust, the young spellcaster surveyed the strange, sheared peaks of the landscape visible through the ruined gateway, keeping her staff at the ready. Following her gaze, the black-haired warrior's eyes widened in sheer disbelief as he realized the absurd scale of annihilation wrought upon the distant mountains. Focusing back on the monster, he observed that its massive form was awkwardly balanced and incomplete, suggesting they had only survived because the creature was still forming. Turning toward their companions, they insisted that the innocent captives nearby be protected and not dragged any deeper into this catastrophic clash. Suddenly, radiant magical glyphs ignited around her in brilliant geometric patterns as the ancient incantation, Fantasy World, was unleashed. Ascending gracefully into the sky surrounded by glowing arcana, she hovered high above the battlefield, ready to unleash her power against the monstrous dragon. As her grand magic unfolds in the skies above, the dark-haired warrior grins eagerly at the daunting prospect of fighting a legendary dragon. Supported by Aria's glowing enhancement circles surrounding the vanguard, she realizes they have no alternative but to unleash their absolute strongest attacks. Channeling a massive spectral blade forged by Mathia's magic, the warrior leaps into the air with a deafening roar, striking down with immense force. Beneath the shadow of her wide-brimmed hat, the young caster solemnly begins her incantation, pronouncing judgment upon the creature that dared anger the heavens. Raising her staff high into the storm, she summons violent bolts of divine thunder to hammer the target in a catastrophic holy strike. Following the lightning strike, lethal obsidian spires erupt violently from the earth, impaling the beast from below with dark energy. A dense cloud of dust and residual magic envelopes the impact area, leaving everyone waiting in breathless anticipation to see if the combined assault succeeded. As the swirling smoke slowly clears, the fighters lower their guard slightly, scanning the haze for any sign of movement from the creature. Horror washes over her face as she looks up, witnessing a colossal shadow rising undamaged high above the cloud layer. To their utter disbelief, the Calamity Dragon emerges completely unscathed from their full-power onslaught, forcing Shu and his companions to brace for immediate retaliation. His party stared in horror at the gouged earth before them, where even the magical terrain of the fantasy world had been shredded by the Calamity Dragon's fury. Standing beside him, the spellcaster gasped as she recognized the absurd scale of the beast's power, realizing that its breath, claws, and impenetrable defense meant a single graze could prove fatal. Sweat beaded on the dark-haired swordswoman's face as the dreadful reality set in. Against an enemy of such devastating strength, a direct hit meant instant death for every one of them. She pointed out that their conventional attacks were dealing no damage whatsoever due to the beast's overwhelming magic resistance, leaving the young leader searching for a way to break the deadlock. Seizing the initiative, the priestess stepped forward and unleashed a blinding, radiant arc across the sky, crying out the invocation for Holy Nova. The brilliant wave of divine energy slammed directly into the monster's colossal flank, engulfing its scales in a searing flash of holy light. Seeing the strike land, the young caster cheered in relief, while the swordsman reasoned that because the beast had been resurrected through dark mana, holy magic was indeed its true vulnerability. Their hope vanished moments later as writhing dark tendrils knitted the dragon's flesh back together, regenerating the wound almost instantly to their sheer disbelief. Observing the monster restore its severed tissue, he turned to the priestess, asking if she could purify its dark mana just as she had done with the Ogre King and the World Tree. He leapt back into motion, knowing that neutralizing such an immense reservoir of corruption would take time, and with lethal attacks coming at them, they had no time to lose. He looked over the battlefield as despair briefly hovered over the party, with some muttering that all hope was lost. Pointing out a vital detail, he explained that if the beast had fully recovered, they would have been finished. However, because Aria's magic could still inflict damage, a path to victory remained open, catching Arya off guard with his sudden optimism. He then admitted the sheer absurdity of the plan, warning them that their survival would rest entirely on his shoulders as a mere supporter and depend on his skill. Without a moment's hesitation, the entire group voiced their unanimous support and absolute belief in him, stunning him before he could even lay out the specifics of his strategy. Looking at Ishia, the party emphasized how much they relied on each other and how everyone had placed their trust in her and the party from the very beginning. Absorbing their words, he realized the profound bond connecting them all, a mutual faith where everyone entrusted their lives to one another. A soft, warm smile washed over his face as he softly expressed how truly happy their unwavering confidence made him feel. Turning to Mithia, Little, and Arya with renewed vigor and a confident grin, he shouted his daring order to hit him directly with their most powerful magic attacks. The party members froze in utter disbelief, their eyes wide and jaws dropped at his insane request. Undeterred by their shock, Arya drew her blade and braced herself as the massive Calamity Dragon towered overhead, ready to unleash chaotic fury upon the battlefield. Her face slick with sweat, she agreed with her companion that even if only for a brief moment, they had to draw the Calamity Dragon's attention away from the battlefield. Hesitating before taking such an extreme measure, the young spellcaster asked if he was truly certain, to which the young commander earnestly pleaded for them to proceed without delay. Uniting their wills, the three heroines unleashed their grandest incantations all at once. Thunder of divine retribution, grim lance, and holy nova, surging forth in a blinding tempest of raw destructive mana. Crackling arcs of lightning and pure energy materialized in the air, converging directly upon their targeted ally. Planted firmly on the ground with open arms, he stood utterly motionless, willingly opening himself up to receive the full force of the oncoming onslaught. A confident grin broke across his face as three lethal spells capable of instantly killing any mortal bore down upon him. In truth, this gambit was rooted in a theoretical concept he had explained earlier. The idea that the elemental attributes of magic could be systematically converted into entirely different affinities. Although the wizarding prodigy had pointed out that such conversions usually suffered severe power loss and lacked practical use, he had already devised a revolutionary solution. He recalled how his research into magical theory had yielded a method to achieve nearly 100% conversion efficiency, leaving his companion utterly stunned that such a groundbreaking discovery was being used so casually. By absorbing and altering their combined elemental spells into pure holy magic, he could channel their concentrated firepower directly into the beast's singular weakness to obliterate it in one decisive blow. He knew that altering the attributes of multiple spells simultaneously with total efficiency rested entirely upon his own skill and focus. Before taking the gamble, he instructed them that if he failed and perished, they were to retreat immediately and wait for the king's reinforcements, a command that met immediate, horror-stricken resistance from his companions. Stepping forward with tears welling in her eyes, Arya pleaded earnestly with him, begging him not to die no matter what happened. Speechless for a brief second, he looked at her in surprise, deeply touched by the depth of her concern. Returning his focus to the present peril, his mind raced as he determined that his first task was to take control of Arya's holy spell. Because they had performed joint chants together countless times, no complex analysis was required, allowing him to effortlessly draw the spell's magical crests into his orbit. Next came the lightning spell. Although their bond was not as old, their shared journeys gave him enough familiarity to seize control, transmute its lightning property into holy magic, and weave it into the expanding holy nova. Seeing the impossible feat unfold, Mithia gaped in utter astonishment as he successfully converted the energy without any loss, though he gritted his teeth knowing one final, far more dangerous spell remained. His concentration faltered as he confronted Ishia's cursed sword magic, a rare and cryptic artifact he had not fully deciphered, realizing with sudden dread that he might not be able to gain control in time. Overcome with panic, his allies watched in horror as the unstable magic threatened to overpower him before the final conversion could take place. She cried out in desperation, her voice piercing through the chaos as she called out to her. As panic grips the party, the women cry out in fear for their companion's safety. Refusing to stand idly by, the young youth thrusts both hands forward, resolutely stepping up to unleash his magic despite the mounting danger. In response to his spell, an abyss of black magic erupts into existence, rapidly expanding across the space as a devastating mana distortion field. The sheer force of the spatial anomaly echoes across the ground, sending metallic rings clattering violently as the magical shockwave surges outward. He calculated that his newly formed spell circles would buy at least a precious second by dampening the giant creature's immense speed. Urging himself to maintain composure despite the extreme urgency, the young mage pressed his fingertips to the glowing glyphs on the ground. With a deafening roar of compressed energy, the spell erupted in a dazzling shockwave across the terrain. Watching the sudden explosion from a distance, his companions cried out in a mixture of disbelief and frantic hope. As the thick plumes of dust began to settle, a long sigh of relief echoed through the haze. Standing unharmed amidst dark, wing-like arcs of woven mana, he offered a confident smirk, noting his timing had been flawless. Reuniting with him, the party breathed a collective sigh of relief, though they questioned how his technique so closely mimicked a standard mana link field while operating on an entirely different scale. Astonished by the phenomenon, Mithia realized he had manipulated time itself, a legendary feat thought lost for centuries, and he casually explained that hypercompressing mana allowed one to warp the very fabric of space-time. As he prepared to channel the final stage of his spell, the towering Calamity Dragon narrowed its slitted eye, fixing its predatory gaze directly upon his immense mana signature. Recognizing that the beast was locking onto their leader, his companions sprang into action, charging forward to draw the dragon's wrath away before it could interrupt the grand spell. She lunged forward alongside her companions, striking relentlessly at the beast's thick hide in a frantic attempt to create a distraction. Gritting her teeth in frustration, she felt her blade bounce off uselessly against the dragon's impenetrable scales. Realizing their attacks were doing no damage at all, the massive creature completely lost interest in them and shifted its ominous gaze toward the solitary mage. As the Calamity Dragon towered over him, a powerful sacred magic was prepared to meet the looming threat head-on. Seeing the desperate window of opportunity, the party shouted in rapid coordination, signaling for their holy caster to unleash her power. Channeling every ounce of magic available into a single localized surge, she released the massive beam of holy nova straight toward the beast. The blinding pillar of light struck the dragon dead on, enveloping its massive form in an intense glare of sacred energy. Yet with a powerful sweep of its body, the dragon casually deflected the wave of force, remaining utterly unscathed. Shock and horror washed over the allies as they realized the monster had neutralized their combined magic using its own breath. Sha clenched his fists in bitter indignation, realizing that even their absolute best spell combination had failed to leave a single mark on the beast. He raised two fingers with a confident smirk, shouting out a sudden enchantment call to draw the beast's focus away. Taking advantage of the distraction, the brave warrior plummeted from above with a fierce battle cry, targeting the dragon's giant eye. The tactic stemmed directly from his earlier plan, where he had predicted the Calamity Dragon would lock onto the massive magical signature surrounding her. He had laid out the strategy to the party, explaining how he would imbue her blade with holy magic via attribute conversion to deliver the ultimate blow. She had eagerly accepted the task, utterly confident in her ability to execute the critical strike. Executando aquil plano no momento present, a espada embida de energia sagrada corta verticalmente o corpo de criatura colossal. Immediately following the blade's pass, a violent column of luminous magic burst upward from the split wound, completely destroying the monster. Smoke and vapor billowed into the air as the massive threat dissolved into nothingness. Relief swept over the party members, who cheered wildly in disbelief that they had managed to defeat the legendary dragon. Yet amidst their joy, he remained calm and focused, knowing that one final task still remained to be done. Facing the oncoming blast head-on, he realized their strategy had overlooked one fatal detail: how to survive the residual energy of the dragon's breath. As Ishia and Mathia cried out in panic, the young leader offered a calm smile, admitting that while their attack had been flawless, they had completely forgotten to prepare a defense for the aftermath. In that critical moment, his memory flashed back to an old academy lecture on magical theory, where scholars insisted that while imagination governs magic, instantaneous teleportation was fundamentally impossible. Refusing to yield to doom, he searched for a loophole. Back then, sitting silently among his peers, he had accepted those established boundaries. But now, facing annihilation, he refused to let traditional theory limit his survival. Plunging straight down into the heart of the explosion, he gathered a surge of magic so immense that the companions below stared in shock at the unprecedented concentration of mana forming around him. With sharp focus, he calculated that creating areas of ultra-high or ultra-low mana density could distort space-time itself, allowing him to directly manipulate the surrounding fabric of reality. By bending spatial coordinates to connect two distant points, the gateway wouldn't need to stay open long, only long enough to grant passage. A glowing rift suddenly tore through reality, and without hesitation, he cast himself straight into the tear. Emerging into a strange, crackling void between realms, he gasped as he found himself floating outside of normal physical space. Closing his eyes against the disorienting realm, he focused every ounce of willpower on maintaining his consciousness, determined to return to the world where his allies awaited. He held fast to the memory of Ishia's warm smile, drawing strength from her image to ground his consciousness within the void. Gritting his teeth against the crushing pressure of the dimensional rift, he vowed to reach his companions no matter the cost. Driven by sheer will, his silhouette pushed forward through the blinding expanse, refusing to be lost between worlds. Outside, a thunderous shockwave shattered the quiet over the snowy mountain ridge as atmospheric forces violently realigned. Back at the edge of the crater, Ishia dropped to her knees in despair, shouting his name repeatedly into the empty air. The rest of the party gathered at the cliff's edge in horrified disbelief, stunned that the blast had left no trace of him behind. Unable to contain her grief, Ishia burst into tears, her heartbroken sobbing echoing across the barren peak. But before their despair could fully settle, a sudden movement and crash behind them knocked them off balance in surprise. Tumbling directly onto them with a wince of pain, Shari emerged into reality, leaving Ishia and the others completely stunned. Rubbing his head from the rough landing, he offered a sheepish apology, explaining that he had managed to return by using Arya as an anchor. He found himself surrounded by his bewildered companions as Mathia explained that according to modern magical theory, teleportation and time displacement should be impossible, while Lillian stared in disbelief at his sudden return. She continued her analysis, reasoning that space and time were fundamentally linked, which meant teleportation and time manipulation were essentially the same phenomenon, a concept he realized he had instinctively put into practice. However, she added a caveat that even if the theory held true, performing such a miracle required an extraordinary amount of mana that only someone on Ishia's divine level could normally achieve. Realizing that deep theoretical debate could wait, the party agreed to leave the complex magical discussions for later and focus on their survival. Exclamations of relief filled the air as the incredible reality finally sank in. They had actually defeated the legendary Calamity Dragon. As the mood lightened, he noted with a smile that Lillian had finally addressed him directly by his name, prompting the companions to begin their journey back to the royal capital. A few days later, news of their victory reached the castle, where the king gasped in absolute shock upon learning that a mere handful of adventurers had slain the mythical beast. Standing before the royal throne, the heroes listened as the monarch recalled ancient legends where 100 great champions barely managed to seal the dragon away, though they humbly clarified that the creature had not been fully restored. Overjoyed by the salvation of his kingdom, the king enthusiastically declared that grand statues of the party would be built in the central plaza, blithely ignoring their embarrassed protests. Abandoning all previous plans for war, the monarch commanded his couriers to cancel the military expedition and proclaimed that a lavish nationwide banquet be held immediately in their honor. He smiled warmly as she spoke up, politely asking if he could direct a personal question to the sovereign. Continuing his inquiry, the young hero mentioned his belief that Alan had arrived at the capital alongside the vigilantes from Harvest Village, causing the king's cheerful demeanor to freeze. Cold sweat breaking out across his forehead, the ruler's jovial facade vanished into grim solemnity as he confessed that he had serious news to convey regarding that matter, leaving the entire party frozen in shock. She reported to the gathered royal court that Alan had likely arrived ahead of them, bringing along the vigilantes from the Harvest Village. Listening to his report, the king's face grew stern as he interjected, warning that there was something critical he needed to convey. He then gestured towards the side of the hall, urging them to examine a document being handed over before they discussed anything else. He presented the official wanted poster, leaving the young warriors speechless as Alan's face stared back from the document, confirming their worst fears. Demanding an immediate explanation for this shocking revelation, the youth pressed for answers, forcing the monarch to reluctantly admit the truth behind the secret bounty. Guided by the sovereign's instructions, Shu and his companions soon arrived at the designated overlook, gazing out toward the outskirts near the capital. Down along the main thoroughfare, armed escorts and supply wagons were already moving along the open road, their guards growing uneasy over rumors of unusual activity nearby. Among the escort group, the vigilantes from Harvest Village discussed their delicate task of transporting Alan under strict security while trying to maintain order. A brief flashback recalled Alan pleading to have his death faked, insisting that if news spread of a former hero allying with a criminal guild, public faith in all heroes would collapse. Interrupting their discussion, one of the guards suddenly pointed off toward the horizon, spotting an abnormal disturbance rapidly approaching across the open fields. Turning to face the unexpected threat, the captain's eyes widened in total disbelief as the earth began to rumble beneath their feet. A massive stampede of vicious monsters thundered across the countryside, surging toward the vulnerable trade route in a wave of chaotic fury. Realizing the scale of the danger, the commander immediately dispatched a rider to warn the city, knowing that if the horde struck unchecked, a horrific slaughter would follow. The escort guards stood their ground on the dusty road, determined to stall the oncoming swarm of monsters for as long as possible. Inside the transport carriage, the captive Alan overheard the chaotic shouts about the monster outbreak. Though he initially cursed his terrible luck, a wicked grin quickly spread across his face as he realized the surrounding panic offered him a golden opportunity to break free. He immediately called out to the commanding officer, demanding to be untied so he could join the defense. The officer eyed him with deep suspicion, suspecting the bound warrior was merely searching for an excuse to run away. Eager to convince him, the desperate prisoner argued that he had no desire to perish in a place like this, proclaiming that despite his past disgrace, he remained a hero at heart. Swayed by the urgency of the approaching swarm, the captain cut his bonds and handed him a weapon, shouting orders to the rest of his men to hold their positions on the carriage. Free from his restraints, a chilling, sinister smile stretched across the traitor's face. Unaware of the threat right beside him, the officer turned to assign his newly freed ally to the left flank, only to sense a sudden surge of lethal intent. Without a moment of hesitation, the villain drove his blade directly through the captain's chest. Snatching the officer's mana potions, he mockingly bade the guards farewell as he turned and fled into the distance. Reeling in pain and shock, the wounded captain looked on in horror, stunned that a former hero could so callously betray them and abandon the city to its fate. Meanwhile, far from the chaotic attack, Shu and his allies examined the official bounty notice, finally grasping how deeply their former comrade had fallen. He listened intently as the surviving guards recounted how the attacking monster horde had abruptly ceased their assault and departed the moment Alan fled. Hearing their testimony, the dark-haired warrior was struck by a sense of familiarity, recalling how eerily similar this sudden retreat was to the monster stampede at the elven village. She pointed out that back then, the creature's movement had been unnaturally coordinated, prompting the party to bring forward a traveling merchant who had witnessed the scene firsthand. Upon being asked to share what he saw, the frightened witness explained that while traveling along the road, his party had been caught directly in the path of the oncoming swarm. The merchant recounted with lingering disbelief how a gorgeous, semi-transparent female figure composed entirely of water had been standing right at the heart of the terrifying monster mass. Upon hearing this detail, the petite spellcaster gasped in shock, realizing that such a being could only be Undine, one of the legendary four heavenly kings capable of commanding low-ranked beasts. Deep in thought, the young commander weighed their words as the party debated the bewildering implication that a high-ranking demon had deliberately stepped in to save the former hero. He eventually spoke up, concluding that with the tracks gone and the monster horde dispersed, continuing their investigation at the site would yield no further clues about Alan's whereabouts. With their decision made, the group agreed to wrap up their search on the plains and set off toward the town of Nobish. Several days later, he arrived at the Nobish Adventurers Guild, pushing open its heavy wooden door to begin the next phase of their journey. As he stepped into the guild hall, a sudden explosion of cheers and confetti showered over him and his companions, completely catching them off guard. He gasped in utter bewilderment, his eyes wide with confusion as he tried to comprehend the chaotic celebration unfolding right in front of him. The guild officials stepped forward to clarify, announcing that news of their victory over the legendary Calamity Dragon had reached the city, prompting the guild leadership to award them a major promotion for their hero-level feats. Loud cheers rang out as the staff officially declared that both Ishia and Arya were being elevated straight to A-rank adventurers. The receptionist explained that while they hadn't formally taken on a contract, an emergency quest had been registered post facto to recognize their solo defeat of the colossal threat. Hearing the staff joke about wishing they could promote the party all the way to S rank, he raised his arms in frantic panic, pointing out how ridiculous that would be so soon after their recent promotion to B rank during the World Tree incident. The guild worker quickly reassured them, confirming that Mathia and Little were also included in this momentous advancement, officially elevating all four of them to A-rank status. Processing the news alongside her companions, Arya reflected on the magnitude of the achievement, knowing that A-rank signified an elite tier of advanced adventurers, a formidable wall that very few ever managed to cross. With a broad, beaming grin, she tossed her arms around him and Ishia, teasingly declaring that his meteoric rise was unprecedented and would surely go down in the annals of adventurer history. Looking ahead to their new responsibilities, she reminded everyone that from tomorrow on they must uphold the dignity of their new rank while finishing leftover tasks, though a well-deserved moment of celebration lay just ahead. She stood amidst the lively cheer of the guild hall as her party prepared to celebrate their new rank, with her companion excitedly raising wooden mugs and warning others about drinking too much. Suddenly, a royal knight in heavy plate armor burst through the entrance, loudly announcing that he bore an urgent message. Holding up an official scroll for all to see, the messenger proclaimed an emergency quest, catching the entire group completely off guard. A collective wave of shock rippled through the gathered adventurers as the gravity of the announcement settled over the room. Murmurs quickly filled the hall, with patrons noting the alarming frequency of these emergency quests lately, pointing out that despite the defeat of the Calamity Dragon, monster activity seemed to be escalating dramatically. The notice detailed a desperate call for reinforcements to defend the distant Pendulum Fortress against an overwhelming assault. The veterans exchanged concerned glances, explaining that the fortress served as the crucial northern defense line against the demon realm and expressing disbelief that a stronghold backed by hundreds of soldiers could be in danger. Further reports revealed that monster attacks in the region had surged unnaturally, with scouts confirming that the creatures were no longer acting on instinct, but coordinating their strikes in an organized military manner. Dread hung heavy in the air as the adventurers realized the dire consequences if the northern bastion were to fall, yet none stepped forward to accept a task that clearly exceeded normal capabilities. Sensing the profound threat behind this sudden strategic shift among the horde, Lillian grimly realized that a far greater catastrophe was unfolding, prompting Shu to call out her name in concern. She stood resolutely alongside her companions, joining her voice with theirs as they declared their intent to accept the fortress defense quest. Seeing her party's unshakable resolve, the surrounding adventurers began whispering in awe, recalling how this famed group had slain the Calamity Dragon. Emboldened by their leadership, other warriors quickly stepped forward, deciding that they too would join the expedition to earn rank and glory. As more volunteers rushed to sign up, Arya and Mathia watched with amused skepticism, while a few overly enthusiastic recruits already began boasting of future wedding plans after victory. Amidst the cheering crowd, Shu offered a modest smile, attributing the massive boost in morale entirely to the beloved presence of his companions. Observing the heartwarming scene, Arya quietly contemplated that those two gentle souls might truly hold the destiny of saving the world. Several days later, at the designated staging grounds near Pendulum Fortress, a young guard in pristine armor warmly welcomed the assembled forces. Introducing himself as Lime, he began to ask who would be taking command of the defense effort, only to be drowned out by stern, commanding shouts. Turning toward the noise, the crowd recognized Lord Inia, the commander of the Central Knights, who made no effort to hide his disdain for the undisciplined adventurers. Though the adventurers welcomed the arrival of elite support, deep, prideful resentment simmered within the Knight Order, who felt their prestige was being eclipsed by the guild. As the arrogant commander led his heavily armored troops forward, the young spellcaster watched them pass with open skepticism, doubting whether soldiers so obsessed with their outward image could truly be relied upon in battle. One of the senior knights sneered back at them, dismissing the group as nothing more than a brat of a hero and no-name adventurers of questionable origin, while boasting that the Central Knights alone were more than enough for the task. Turning his back on them with a blunt warning not to get in their way, the knight marched off, leaving the young spellcaster fuming with rage as her companions attempted to soothe her anger. Their attention was soon diverted as a magnificent airship loomed over the open field, explaining why they had been summoned to such an isolated location to board their transport to the fortress. Both the adventurers and the proud knights gathered beneath the shadow of the colossal vessel, preparing for embarkation. Staring up at the towering craft in complete awe, the young spellcaster marveled at the impressive engineering of the kingdom's newest airship. Her frustration instantly forgotten, she burst with excitement and rallied the party to set off for Pendulum Fortress, while her allies watched her energetic mood swing. As they began boarding alongside the rigid soldiers, the black-haired youth quietly hoped that friction with the Central Knight Order would not compromise their joint defense. Days after setting out by airship, the expedition's vessel unexpectedly makes landfall, prompting Inia to demand why they have grounded so far short of the Pendulum Fortress. The commanding officer orders the cargo unloaded immediately, explaining that approaching the demon realm by air makes them an easy target for monsters and requiring overland transport. Surrounding soldiers protest, arguing that giving up air transport leaves them far more vulnerable to attacks. Dismissing their worries, the headstrong commander arrogantly decides that the Central Knights will march ahead on their own. Enya quickly intervenes, warning him that the troops lack the proper preparation for such a hasty terrestrial advance. As the debate continues, other officers suggest allowing the adventurers to handle the transport or advancing together as a unified force, hoping to prevent a disastrous split in their ranks. Furious at having his authority questioned, the veteran commander harshly silences Enya, barking that a knight from the borderlands has no right to lecture the leader of the Central Knights. Seething with pride, the commander inwardly fumes over the king favoring lower-ranking knights and adventurers, feeling deeply insulted that their grueling daily training is being overlooked. Determined to prove his order's superiority, he resolves to march ahead and demonstrate the true power of the Central Knights to everyone. Following the confrontation, Enya confers with Shu and Arya, who acknowledge how frustrating it is to deal with such stubborn high-ranking commanders. Realizing they cannot openly disobey orders, Enya suggests quietly sending an elite unit ahead to provide backup if needed. Reflecting on the underlying issue, he explains that the Central Knights are a prestigious order composed largely of nobles who inherited their positions through status rather than merit. As the heavily armored knights march down the road in impressive formation, he highlights the dangerous reality facing them. Despite their elite status, they possess virtually no actual combat experience. Shu was caught completely off guard by the sudden revelation, his eyes widening in disbelief as he processed the news. The attendant explained that even after the king's repeated warnings, the Central Knights had stubbornly insisted on advancing, gaining permission under the pretense of handling baggage transport. Questioning why such inexperienced nobility were sent to the front lines against the demon race, he listened as the guard noted how Commander Enya loved to play the hero the moment an operation began. Back at the royal grounds, the king watched their departure with a heavy heart, quietly praying that the headstrong commander would not throw his troops into senseless danger before reinforcements arrived. Ahead of them stood Pendulum Fortress, a massive stone barrier marking the boundary between the realm of humanity and the lands of the demons. Inside its walls, Commander Enya smiled proudly, hailed as a prodigy since his academy days, completely confident that his arrival guaranteed absolute safety. The local knights celebrated the presence of high-ranking figures like Lady Ishia and Lillian, dismissing the seasoned adventurers who were left to unpack supplies in a nearby village. Blinded by his own vanity and past victories in royal exhibition matches, he scoffed at the idea of needing assistance from common adventurers, viewing battle as merely another stage for his personal glory. Ignoring the reality that his men had only experienced staged martial arts duels rather than real combat, the headstrong commander impetuously demanded that the fortress gates be opened immediately. With heavy grinding gears, the gigantic iron doors opened toward the demon realm, and the commander ordered the entire Central Knight Battalion to march forward into enemy territory. High above the battlefield, a solitary observer watched the struggle below, noting that the local defense forces were encountering unexpected trouble against the enemy. Down on the dusty plain, the giant Grand Orc raised its heavy wooden club, threatening to shatter the shield wall of the struggling vanguard. Suddenly, a resounding command echoed across the hills as the Central Knights Order launched a full-scale downhill charge, shouting for the infantry to hold firm until they arrived. In response to the beast's aggressive press, the frontline knights dug their boots into the soil, desperately locking shields to withstand the monster's crushing weight. Rallied by their unit's steadfast defense, the local commander urged his shield-bearers to keep holding on while directing the spellcasters behind them to prepare a decisive magical strike. Before any spell could be unleashed, a thunderous roar of approaching hooves shook the earth, forcing the startled soldiers to look back in total confusion. Watching the incoming cavalry, the commander gasped in disbelief, unable to comprehend why an entire elite regiment would charge headlong into battle for a single monster. Leading the thunderous assault, the king himself rode at the front in ornate full-plate armor, bellowing with triumphant vigor as his knights swept toward the front line. With an overwhelming surge of steel and speed, the Royal Vanguard tore directly through the enemy, severing the monster in a single coordinated blitz. As the dust cleared over the abruptly quieted field, the stunned local garrison saluted in awestruck silence before their monarch and his elite guards. His reckless charge drew immediate outrage from the local officers, who screamed frantically at their men to reform their ranks, fall back, and establish a defensive line against the looming beast, cursing whoever was leading this suicidal assault. The border commanders argued furiously that facing a Grand Orc required proper tactics, positioning heavy shield bearers in front while ranged spellcasters attacked from a distance, rather than blind brute force. Ignoring their frantic warnings, an arrogant knight commander raised his blade high, berating the local forces as cowards and boasting that his own superior swordsmanship would effortlessly slay the beast in head-on combat. Screaming a ferocious battle cry, he unleashed a flurry of rapid strikes against the massive creature, only to freeze in disbelief when his blades failed to leave even a single scratch. To his horror, the Grand Orc stood completely unharmed. With a terrifying glint in its eye, the monster raised its colossal club and prepared to crush the foolish knight. Stumbling backward in sheer panic, the knight stared at a tiny trace of blood on his palm, completely losing his composure and holding out his hands to beg for mercy. As the shadow of the towering beast enveloped him, he whimpered helplessly, demanding that the monster stop simply because he had suffered a minor scratch. Cowering on the ground with his hands covering his helmet, he broke into hysterical wails, desperately begging anyone nearby to save his life. A giant wooden club swung down with crushing force, but a heroic knight effortlessly intercepted the strike with her blade, halting the monstrous Grand Orc in its tracks. Looking back with a confident smirk, she casually chided the startled soldiers behind her, asking what they were doing letting their guard down like that. Hearing her voice, Shu and his companions rushed up behind the shield line, expressing immense relief that they had arrived in the nick of time to support Inia. Glancing back over her shoulder at the looming behemoth, she coolly noted that against a mere Grand Orc, her sword alone would be more than enough to handle the threat. In a brilliant flash of silver, she executed a single, blinding slash that cleanly bisected the towering beast before it could even swing again. Behind her, the arrogant knight commander stared in stunned disbelief, his eyes wide with shock at the casual display of overwhelming martial skill. Recovering his composure, the old officer blustered angrily at the new arrivals, demanding to know why they were here instead of fulfilling their assigned transport duties. He patiently explained that Rhyme had been deeply concerned for everyone's safety, which had prompted their group to sprint ahead to reinforce them. The proud officer scoffed bitterly at the unsolicited assistance, prompting the nearby allies to murmur in frustration at his complete lack of gratitude after being saved. Attempting to de-escalate, she suggested they all fall back to the fortress to regroup and reorganize their lines, but the stubborn officer angrily refused to take orders from him. As he looked on in quiet observation, the local knights gathered around their trembling commander, openly mocking the man for collapsing in terror. The humiliated leader sputtered uselessly, ordering them to keep quiet, but his authority had completely evaporated. Continuing their relentless teasing, the officers declared that carrying their helpless leader off the field would be the Central Knight's very first honorable task. Snickers echoed through the ranks as the remaining soldiers relished the sudden downfall of their proud superior. Seated helplessly in his heavy armor, the commander could only glare as the soldier boisterously added that they should also remember to change their commander's soiled trousers before continuing the mission. "Welcome to Pendulum," the grinning officer declared sarcastically, bestowing a new and embarrassing title upon the commander to mark the disgrace he had brought upon the Central Knights. Sweating profusely with his eyes wide in absolute humiliation, the ruined leader listened helplessly as boisterous laughter echoed across the entire battlefield at his expense. Stepping aside from the commotion, the knight officers turned their attention towards his companions, marveling that their contact had somehow managed to recruit the actual hero's party to support their line. Though it may have been sheer luck that brought them here, one of the officers admitted that securing such formidable allies was an undeniable stroke of brilliance given the dire circumstances. Nearby, The massive, lifeless corpse of the Grand Orc lay motionless on the earth, a stark testament to the sheer lethality of the single sword stroke that had brought it down. Looking over at the party as they stood together in quiet composure, the knight realized the terrifying scale of their power. If a single member could slay such a beast effortlessly, the hero's party possessed strength beyond measure. As visions of titanic, shadowy monsters loomed in his mind, a ray of genuine hope began to flicker within him, contemplating that this party might truly hold the power to slay those legendary abominations. Hearing the strategic briefing, Arya processed the startling news that two exceptionally powerful monsters were directing the enemy's assault. The commanding officers laid out tactical maps of the region, explaining how the monster forces were acting with unprecedented coordination rather than mere feral instinct, rapidly overwhelming conventional military outposts. Analyzing the situation, Shu and his companions proposed sending a small, elite strike force directly into the heart of the enemy's stronghold to eliminate the leaders rather than engaging in a costly war of attrition. The threats in question were terrifying in scope: a colossal giant controlling destructive flames, and an ominous humanoid warrior enveloped in a dark, malignant aura. The local defenses had already suffered devastating losses against these two figures, leaving the surviving garrison trapped and desperate for aid from the Adventurers Guild. Assessing the intel, the group deduced that these entities were likely connected to the four Heavenly Kings, yet they remained confident, having already overcome similar foes before. Refusing to let uncertainty slow them down, Arya declared that further speculation was useless and that the true extent of the enemy's strength would only be revealed when they met in battle. Standing united before the gathered military leaders, the party affirmed their resolve to vanquish both high-ranking monsters themselves. Upon hearing their bold pledge, the surrounding soldiers cheered with overwhelming relief, revitalized by the knowledge that the country's strongest party was championing their cause. With spirits restored, she took a moment to inquire about Ennia's whereabouts, wondering why the head of the Central Knights had not yet made an appearance. He listened in silence as the arrogant knight commander boasted with a ruthless grin, admitting that if Ennia ever became a hindrance, he would simply lock him away in a dungeon out of sheer annoyance. Reviewing the official decree handed down by the king, the young strategist noted how the chain of command had shifted, leaving higher-ranking officers to handle only menial tasks while their subordinates diligently carried out the real work. As dusk settled over the fortress, the party gathered outside to prepare for the upcoming mission, agreeing that resting thoroughly tonight was essential before embarking at daybreak. By the following day, the party ventured deep into the demon realm, where the oppressive miasma grew thicker with every step, though the continuous shield surrounding them kept the hostile atmosphere at bay. Observing the borderlands, they witnessed frontline knights fiercely battling wave after wave of demonic beasts, earning high praise from the spellcaster for their remarkable endurance and skill under such severe conditions. Checking their course against the map charted by the previous expedition, the leader expressed deep gratitude, knowing those detailed records were the only reason they had bypassed countless roving monsters to execute a direct ambush. At last, the path led them directly to the mouth of a darkened cavern nestled within the jagged cliffs, the primary base of the enemy forces. Unfazed by the ominous shadow ahead, the swordsman offered a confident smile to his companions, leading them steadfastly into the depths of the cavern. Yet as they crossed the threshold, a swarm of feral goblins crouched along the stone steps, glaring down at the intruders and preparing to fiercely defend their lair. As the party stood amidst a pile of slain monsters deep within the cavern, Ishia let out a soft sigh, noting that they should be approaching the lowest level soon. Surveying the fallen beasts, the swordsman marveled at how effortlessly they were cutting through the dungeon horde using powerful skills without feeling a trace of exhaustion. Witnessing the warm glow around them, Mythia voiced a deep appreciation for their cleric, acknowledging just how vital her supportive magic was in keeping everyone energized. Without warning, a violent rumble shook the subterranean chamber. Sensing immediate danger, Arya lunged forward to shield young Lillian as a towering, dark shadow emerged ahead, its booming laughter echoing off the stone walls. The heavy dust parted to reveal a menacing, horned demon wielding twin blades. The companions readied their weapons, recognizing the fierce humanoid beast standing before them as Afrida. Locking eyes with the group, the monster spoke in a surprisingly coherent voice, chillingly addressing Ishia and hero Lillian by name, while the swordsman watched in total disbelief. As the beastly facade cracked, he revealed his true identity. It was Alan, the fallen hero, his face twisted into a menacing grin as he glared down his former allies. Weeks earlier, beneath the pitch-black canopy of a dense forest, hunting parties had shouted to one another in the dark, closing in on a high-value bounty target. Sprinting wildly through the shadows, he fled from his pursuers, his heavy boots pounding the uneven soil as bitter curses tore from his throat. Drenched in cold sweat and consumed by humiliation, he gnashed his teeth in fury, enraged that a former celebrated hero like himself had been reduced to a hunted criminal. He ran wildly through the valley, cursing Ishia with every desperate breath and blaming her for his complete ruin. Suddenly, his path vanished as he collided against a sheer wall of rock, realizing too late that he had fled into a dead end. Close behind, a group of armed pursuers closed in, shouting that they had finally cornered the infamous fugitive and demanding he yield. Cautious of his reputation, the mercenaries warned one another to stay alert, well aware of the dangerous power of his holy sword skill. Cornered and furious, he drew his blade with a snarl, calling upon the magic of his holy sword to crush those who stood before him. But just as he struck, his mana drained completely dry. Helpless, he was viciously cut down and overwhelmed by his opponent's relentless blows. As he lay bleeding against the cold stone, a sinister voice echoed near him, expressing relief at arriving just in time to intercept his fate. Emerging before his eyes was Undine, an elemental woman surrounded by swirling water, who introduced herself as one of the demon kings for heavenly kings. Stunned by her legendary status, he stammered in disbelief, assuming such a powerful enemy had come to execute him, but she dismissed his assumption with a smirk. With a horde of monstrous beasts gathering behind her, she casually inquired whether the previous monster stampede had proven useful to his plans. She stood calmly before him as the truth sank in, leading him to demand if she was the one responsible for the entire disturbance. Clinging to his sword for support, his eyes widened as she smoothly admitted to being the very mastermind who had entrapped him. Undine whispers deceitful words into Alan's ear, presenting him with an opportunity to claim vengeance against Ishia and the rest of humanity. He hesitates, protesting that the hero, the Sword Saint, and the Saintess constantly protect her, but the Water Spirit dismisses his concerns, insisting that acquiring the Demon Lord's power will make it effortless. She further explains that while wielding such dark magic will turn him into a criminal and an enemy of all mankind, it remains his only path to retribution. The thought of achieving his revenge takes root in his mind. His thoughts instantly spiral out of control, filled with a twisted, consuming obsession with Ishia. Driven past the brink of sanity, he snaps and demands that Undine take him directly to the Demon Lord without delay. Dark veins and corruption spread across his face as his human soul yields entirely to malice. Returning to the present confrontational moment, he bellows at Shu and the companions gathered before him, shouting that the elemental spirit was correct about them intervening whenever humanity fell into danger. With contorted features and eyes wild with unrestrained fury, he screeches his burning hatred, swearing to destroy them all. Gazing at his fallen state with deep sorrow, Arya listens as her allies behind her declare that two of them are more than enough to handle this battle. Behind the tragic former hero, a sinister horned demon grins with razor-sharp teeth, eager to slaughter hero Lillian. As the towering monster loomed over the battlefield, a mysterious orb of concentrated magic materialized before him, humming with dense geometric energy. Preparing to counter his menacing aura, delicate young hands reached outward, fingers splayed to channel an intricate spell. With a dramatic shout, she invoked Fantasy World, deploying vast concentric magic circles beneath the giant adversary, while her beloved plush bear hovered in the center of the radiant domain. Meanwhile, across the rocky terrain, the rest of the party halted as their former comrade emerged from the shadow of the cliff, confronting them head-on. Standing shoulder to shoulder, the companions maintained their resolve, acknowledging that this encounter was their fated duel against Alan's faction. With dark demonic markings spread across his face, the fallen hero taunted them to step forward, met only by the fierce, unwavering glares of Shu and his allies. Elsewhere on the front line, the massive horned general stood alongside his ally, declaring with a sinister grin that it was time to settle their score once and for all. Looming directly over the warriors below, his sharp fangs bared in a predatory grin, the demon asserted that this final confrontation would determine their ultimate fate. The imposing, horned demon stood defiantly before the two heroines, mocking them with a wide grin and inviting them to step forward and face him. Spurred by his taunt, Arya drew her blade and surged forward alongside Mithia, who urged her ally to wrap up the battle quickly since they had already bested this brute once before. As she bounded into the sky, Mithia channeled her magic into Arya's weapon, amplifying its glow into a radiant light capable of piercing any defense. She plummeted through the swirling clouds with incredible momentum, aiming her fully charged blade straight down at the monster's skull. The gleaming steel sliced through the vaporized air, descending rapidly toward its mark with terrifying precision. However, the demon simply sneered, easily parrying the powerful downward strike with his hardened forearm and knocking her back into the air. Skidding to a halt back beside her ally, she caught her balance as Mithia cried out in alarm, realizing the monster's magical resistance had somehow surged far beyond its previous limits. Gritting her teeth with a rueful smile, she noted how lately every formidable opponent seemed capable of rendering their absolute best attacks completely ineffective. Before they could reevaluate their strategy, the beast began radiating a suffocating aura of dark mana, boasting that the Demon King himself had bestowed brand new power upon him. Unleashing a deafening roar, he launched himself high into the sky, swirling with crimson flames before diving back down with the catastrophic force of a falling star. As his devastating power rippled across the field, she gasped in horror, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of the threat before them. Undeterred by the dark display, her allies braced themselves for battle, but across from them, the fallen hero gripped his sword with a twisted, manic grin. With a desperate roar, he forced dark magic into the weapon, summoning its corrupted power until the earth fractured beneath his feet. The young leader gaped in utter disbelief as the sacred blade, meant to radiate pure, holy light, was consumed entirely by a sinister black haze. A monumental pillar of dark energy erupted into the air as he swung the blackened sword, unleashing a wave of pure destructive intent. Analyzing the ferocious onslaught, the young spellcaster warned that close combat was suicidal, while her companion realized the corruption had altered the blade far beyond its physical appearance. A sudden realization struck him as he assessed his active aura. Under normal circumstances, any human standing within his mana field would suffer severe intoxication. Taking a bold gamble, he activated his magic overflow, attempting to flood his rival's body with an unbearable strain of atmospheric energy. Rather than collapsing under the crushing pressure, the traitor merely chuckled before bursting into maniacal laughter, boasting that the Demon King's gift made him completely immune to such tricks. Watching in absolute horror, they realized that their enemy had used demonic power to break his human limits, leaving them stripped of their greatest strategic advantage. He stood alongside his party as they quickly reassessed their strategy, reasoning that the only true threat was the destructive power of the Holy Sword itself. They deduced that if they simply kept dodging his attack over and over, he would eventually run out of mana just like before, bringing a swift end to the battle. On the battlefield, magical projectiles continued to rain down mercilessly, prompting Mithia to urgently call out to Alan to prepare for the relentless assault. Following the barrage, a colossal wave of demonic energy surged across the terrain, bearing down directly upon Diana and the spellcasters standing behind her. Refusing to yield, the dark-haired swordswoman met the monstrous Ifrita head-on, though the brute force of his strike dug her boots deep into the earth as she skidded backward. Smirking with ruthless satisfaction, the horned demon taunted her for having the nerve to face his overwhelming physical strength head-on. Labeling her resistance as pure foolishness, he shattered her guard with a brutal blow, sending her crashing onto the ground as her allies cried out in alarm. Capitalizing on her momentary vulnerability, the creature launched into a rapid flurry of strikes, his fists blurring into a terrifying barrage that forced the companions backward. Struggling to maintain composure, she realized the severe strain on their side. Even with Lillian's skill manifesting a custom reality around them, their opponent remained completely unfazed. Observing the clash, Shu mentally calculated the harsh tactical reality. Their high magic drain required a swift victory without support, yet the enemy's massive resistance made finding a decisive finisher nearly impossible. A chill ran down her spine as she caught the grin on their foe's face, realizing with horror that even a brute like Afrida had deduced their fatal lack of finishing power. Overflowing with supreme confidence, the horned demon cackled maniacally as he readied another devastating surge. Leaving the defenders bracing for an assault they were ill-equipped to stop. He threw his head back and roared, unleashing a burst of raw demonic power into the air, yet the two warriors before him stood entirely unbothered. He burst into boisterous, echoing laughter, bragging aloud that victory over Lillian was already within his grasp, though a sudden subtle shift in the air caused him to pause. His triumphant mood withered the instant he looked upon their faces, only to meet subtle, unwavering smirks that radiated absolute confidence. They stood steadfast without a single trace of fear, leaving the demon completely bewildered as he questioned why they acted so composed despite being overwhelmingly at a disadvantage. He glared at the unflinching duo, shouting that those were not the expressions of opponents who were supposed to be losing. Her steady gaze completely unraveled his composure, making him clutch his head in rising frustration as he desperately pleaded with them to stop looking at him that way. He collapsed to his knees under the weight of his own psychological defeat, clutching his scalp and bellowing in furious agony into the sky. He gritted his fangs in disbelief, sweat pouring down his brow as he struggled to comprehend how the tide of battle had shifted so completely. While he remained broken on the ground, the two companions stepped forward with complete composure, reminding him that after repelling him long ago, they had fought and overcome countless formidable enemies. She emphasized that meeting compassionate humans like Ishia had taught them invaluable lessons, shaping them into warriors far stronger than he could ever comprehend. Her calm words left the demon commander trembling in utter disbelief, his voice faltering as he struggled to comprehend their absolute confidence. Lillian met his panicked gaze with a fearless smile, reminding him that he was not the only one who had gained power through their recent trials. Channeling her magic, she unleashed the second form of her secret technique, conjuring swirling ribbons of water around her frame to lock the battlefield under her command. Meanwhile, deeper within the cavern, Shu lunged across the stone ground, keeping his movements swift and sharp as the battle raged on another front. Ishia watched Alan handle his sword with uncharacteristic stamina, noting to Shu that under normal circumstances, their opponent should have collapsed from mana depletion long ago. As the group paused to process the strange encounter, Shu pointed out another troubling inconsistency. No matter how much someone leveled up, endless mana was an impossibility, as was complete immunity to mana sickness. Looking across the desolate landscape of the demon realm, they realized that the field of thick miasma surrounded them, meaning Alan had severed his connection to the mana link field long ago. Astonishment washed over them as they considered how a mere human could fight unhindered within the toxic miasma that should have incapacitated anyone else. Cold sweat broke out on his brow as he pieced together the horrifying reality of how Alan had been operating in this hostile territory long before their arrival. Standing proudly in the haze, the rogue former hero actively drew the thick miasma into his body, converting the corruptive energy straight into pure magical power. He sneered with sadistic delight, congratulating them for finally grasping the truth behind his uncanny endurance. Revealing a grotesque, eye-bearing parasite attached to his shoulder, he proudly declared that this horrific creature was the source of power bestowed upon him by the demon lord. Shocked by the disturbing sight, she and her companion stared in horror at the pulsating magic item fused to their enemy's flesh. As the fleshly parasite pulsated while drinking in the surrounding air, they understood that it allowed him to bypass mana sickness entirely, giving him an infinite reservoir to unleash holy sword strikes endlessly. Refusing to be intimidated, she quickly pivoted their tactics, declaring that they simply needed to stop trying to cut off his mana and strike directly instead. Her call to action was met with instantaneous retaliation, as dark tendrils whipped through the air and Alan announced he would now take the offensive. A sinister smirk spread across his face, his eyes gleaming with malicious confidence as he braced for their onslaught. With a swift motion, he raised his sword, summoning an intricate, glowing barrier of magic to absorb any incoming assault. Seeing the barrier manifest, Sha gasped in shock at how effortlessly their opponent negated their presence, urgently calling out to Arya to prepare themselves. Unwilling to hesitate, Ishia stepped forward and thrust her staff ahead, unleashing her powerful Holy Nova spell with a radiant burst. The blinding beam of divine energy surged straight toward Alan, only to crash uselessly against his protective magic seal. Determined to break through, Mythia immediately followed up, aiming her wand to call down a violent strike of judgment lightning. Yet, as the roaring bolt struck the shield, the barrier absorbed the devastating impact completely, dissipating the electricity into harmless sparks. The companions looked on in utter horror and disbelief, horrified that their strongest elemental and holy magic had failed to leave a single scratch. Alan stood unfazed amidst the clearing smoke, exposing the grim reality that magic held no power against his formidable barrier. He smirked with cruel satisfaction, revealing that the gift he received from the Demon Lord was far more terrifying than merely absorbing the surrounding mana. With a wicked grin, Alan announced his ultimate defense, Magic Factor Breakdown, boasting that no magical attack in existence could ever harm him again. Hearing this, Sha stood frozen in shock as he realized the terrifying truth. Between an endless holy sword strike and absolute magic immunity, their enemy possessed a nearly flawless offense and defense. Standing at a distance from the barrier's edge, the party looked on in mounting despair, utterly unsure of how to breach such an unbreakable defense. Noticing their hesitation, Alan mockingly taunted the so-called party of the strongest heroes before lunging forward to initiate the attack himself. Gritting her teeth in frustration, Arya could barely contain her irritation at being forced onto the back foot by someone like him. As the situation grew desperate, Shu pieced together the clues, the magic factor breakdown, the holy sword, and the miasma absorption, and called out for everyone to stay calm. A subtle look of realization washed over Shu's face as a new strategy began to form in his mind. Stepping forward with sudden confidence, Shu raised his hands and declared to his allies that if his theory was correct, victory was still within their reach.